say because I went into when I was like when I first got it. Because when I tell you audiobook and like physical book at the library, they were like, there are 36 holds on 10 copies. I've never seen that before in my life. So I bought it, but I didn't read the synopsis. Usually, like when we're choosing books, I just go ahead and choose whatever one has the most books. I'm like, I'm not trying to rock the boat. I'm down for any and everything. And so when I voted for it, I had no idea. I hadn't read the synopsis yet. I was like finding everything out as I went. I had no idea that it was gonna have like fictional ties to non-fictional. I had no idea it was queer. I had no idea if like most of the characters were black. When I tell you I was just finding out stuff as I went, I was like, whoa. It was a great read. Personally, 10 out of 10, no notes.
And so that to start, I just want to welcome everyone to the July meeting of the Leg Booty Mafia Book Club. So this month we are talking about Chain Gang All Stars and the Angela Davis autobiography. I don't want to butcher the author of Chain Gang author's name, so I will not attempt. But and I don't have the book right here in front of me because I actually don't have a physical copy of this book anymore because I read it from the library, and so I had the audio because I bought it on Audible when I was listening to it. Let me see. So
Yeah, I'm the direct opposite. I got the library book of Angela Davis, and then I bought the
I also had the library book for Angela Davis because I have a very I have a little system with library cards where I have like so a lot of times if you can have the library card for the library nearest to you, but also you can usually get into like a state system that has like more books or like a big city near you kind of library system that I use as well. And then I use my mom's address, my new mom's New Jersey address, to get a library card for the North Public Library as well. And
you got it locked in.
so I use that. So I rare and it helps me because I read a lot of books, and a lot of times I like when I'm like mood reading, I like want to read a lot of books on the same subject, and it can be not as easy to get some books sometimes. So and I want to like support libraries and things like that. So it helps with that because it's like really easy to like say like, okay, even though like there's like a wait for the book here, maybe this library has more copies and there's no wait or something like that. So it ends up working out really good for me. Or like there's a shorter wait at some other libraries, and it's all legal and all that stuff. So I'm not like breaking any rules. So it's just good to like have that as like a resource. So I actually did check out the Angela Davis autobiography also from the library. And then Ian was on uh what's it called? Uh team group, what's it called? Uh team chat or like chat room. She was we were in the chat room, and I was actually listening to Siri. So like
Oh,
the
Discord.
yeah, the Discord chat room. Was on a Discord chat room, and I was actually having Siri read
Oh,
the audio, reading the ebook to me. So I do that sometimes.
that's so.
When I
I didn't even.
I was
when I want to
joking
read.
about you using AI. It's just to
Well,
text to
it's kind of
speech.
AI. I mean,
That is so helpful. I didn't even think about that. You see, I ended up reading I got like 30 pages into Angela Davis's like physical copy, and I was like, my attention span can't do this. But then when I put on the audiobook and I treated it like a podcast, it went so smooth. So I might have to do that for the physical
Hmm.
or for the ebooks.
yeah, it works out really good because like if I only have the ebook and I don't have the audiobook and I don't have like an easy way to get to the audiobook, I will like do that. And that because like it also is good because it if I want to like stop the audiobook, it already has because it like flips the way that Siri does it is you like use the accessibility feature to have it read the page. And what it'll do is it'll like read the page and then flip to the next page and read that page and then flip and read it, flip and read it, flip. So like you can stop it and pause it, and it has your play stopped. And like
Nice.
also if you like, you can stop and pause it and then read like just like with your eyeballs, and then you can go back to having Siri read it for you and stuff. And for some people it might be a little too robotic, but it's okay for me because I like a lot of times audiobooks are like too slow for me anyway, so like I speed them up. And once it's at like a 2 times speed, like it sounds like everybody kind of sounds like a robot anyway, so it's okay. It doesn't sound that different to me from when I read like a regular audiobook.
Yeah, I
Um,
definitely hear that. Yeah, Angela, because Angela Davis narrated her audiobook. Bless her heart, she speaks with intention, but she does speak very slow. Cause I think I had it on like 1.5 speed and it sounded like how I was talking now. And I was like, that's just how it's gonna have to be on this one. So I would listen to it on my morning walks a lot, and I would knock out my morning walks were like 30 minutes, and I would knock out like 2 hours worth of reading for the book, and the whole book was 17 hours. So it was an interesting experience.
the crazy thing about it is though, like Angela Davis's autobiography is almost as action packed as Chain Gang All Stars, and
Mm-hmm.
the crazy thing about it is that it's not as violent, but because Chain Gang All Stars is super violent, but it just is so crazy how much she had been through in such a short period of time. Like if you think about it, like she wrote that book in, I think the book was published in like 1977 or something like that. So it was, and obviously she's still alive today. So like it encapsulates her life. Like it eventually goes back, but she starts out
Yeah.
like right in the thick of it, like right as she's about to be arrested
Mm-hmm.
for uh let me look this up because I don't want to say it wrong.
Yeah, when I tell you, I will say, one thing I guess for both of these books, the theme that kind of ran through it for me is that the state really stop at nothing, and it will do anything and everything to keep you in its crosshairs. And it was very poignant. I think it was very poignant being able to like read. I guess it felt, especially with the violence aspect a little bit, it felt like we got dystopian, but from like adult fiction instead of young adult fiction. And so it felt like it was a little bit, as I was reading that book, it just had me flash back to different points in Angela Davis's autobiography. Um, and it was, I mean, I really enjoyed that. It was very, I mean, on top of all that, it being Black August too, like that was a great way to kind of intro, like I guess usher it in. Mm.
Yeah, it is um I'm something, there's something like really, I was just enthralled with it. It reminds me of, I read The Assassination of Fred Hampton, and that is written by the lawyer who represented Fred's family after he was murdered by the Chicago police. And um, Fred Hampton was also a Black Panther, and it it just further goes to show me that I just really love like a core like political trial narrative. Like there's just something so enthralling to me. Even though this book is like not really about her trial, it's more about um her experiences as an activist and how
Yeah, like her building of who she is. Yeah.
yeah, her ability, the trial is just like a really, really small part at the end of the book. And it kind of leads into the trial. It's more like about like, you know, her experience with incarceration, her how she got to her awakening as a prison abolitionist, and her activism leading up to the trial, which leads right into the trial because they were originally prosecuting her for her activism, which is why the charges were brought to her. So she was arrested for conspiracy, murder, and what's it what's the word, kidnapping. So kidnapping, um, murder, and conspiracy, because of when there was this trial, there was this other trial going on around these people called the Soledad brothers. And the Soledad brothers also play a part in the assassination of Fred Hampton, which is why I was thinking about it so much, because a lot of people don't, at the time when the Black Panthers were happening, and there was a lot of activism kind of sort of in the 1960s, late 1960s, around when the time where, Martin Luther King was murdered, not necessarily like a lot of when his activism was happening, like at literally the time when he was murdered. There was a lot of, there was this thing going on in the government called COINTELPRO, where the US government was spying on a lot of Black activists, and they were like setting them up for crimes, falsely imprisoning them, prosecuting them, murdering them, conspiring to murdering them. The only they did murder multiple people, including Fred Hampton, in connection to COINTELPRO. But and Martin Luther King Jr. But they also murdered him. Let's not forget that. But there were these activist lawyers, like, who would represent a lot of these people pro bono, because a lot of these people didn't have money. It's similar to what happened with the what's going on with the Black Lives Matter movement now. You have like people that stand up for injustices in various cases. If you've ever heard of the movie Just Mercy, there's the one where Michael B. Jordan plays a lawyer kind of like that, who's a real lawyer who is still alive today, who represents a lot of people on death row, trying to get them off death row, get them exonerated for the crimes that they are accused of, get them off of the death penalty just in general. So a lot of that coincides with the general movement for prison abolition that Angela Davis is kind of a pioneer of. And so a lot of people don't realize how all of that stuff was happening kind of at the same time, and how it all sort of coincided and connected to each other. So someone like Angela Davis, who is a queer Black woman who was part of the the Communist Party in the late 1960s, and was also part of the Black Panther Party, was a prime target for the Cold War and the government in the US's prosecution of those types of activists. So when the Soledad brothers case happened, and one of the brothers of one of the people in the Soledad brothers, well, Soledad brothers, for those that don't know, is these three inmates who were I don't know, the specifics of the case are eluding me right now, but they were on trial for, I think, murder and Soledad brothers. Yeah, so they were charged with the murder of a prison guard during a prison riot. So there was basically, what happened was, there was an engineered prison riot where yeah, so there was this general movement for prison abolition, right? You had all these activists that were being jailed wrongfully. This is also coming out of the Jim Crow, where there were tons and tons of Black people in jail for crimes that were unconstitutional. And so there was this general movement for prison abolition. You had all these people that would go to prison, and then they would be radicalized as activists, and they will become activists through prison as they were reading all this literature about how, you know, the system was rigged against them and things like that. And so the government was basically, you know, trying to quell these prisoners. And I don't know how it is in Australia, but in the US, prisoners can't vote. They can't vote, they can't participate in their own participate in our democracy. And so the prison system in the US is very much an extension of slavery. And so
Yeah, I remember learning about like I was like late teenager when I learned like prisons like were like doubled as
They,
factories where they just got the prisoners to labor, and I'm just like, wait, hang on a second. And then like you just think about it for like 30 seconds and go, okay, so you like incarcerate people for weed, for like doing weed, and then use them for unpaid labor. And I'm like, hang
Mhm.
on a
And then
second.
disenfranchise them when they get out.
Hang on a second. This is
yeah,
just slavery with extra steps.
I mean, 13th
And then
Amendment right there.
all of the like and then you like think about like how people who are formerly slave wranglers and they're like, oh well now we don't have slaves anymore. And it's like, oh well your skill set would be very good as like a police officer if you tried doing that. And it's
Mhm.
just like, oh my God. This
yeah,
is very dystopian. Just yeah, like it's not hard to see the connective tissue.
It is a very straight line that people do not want to see at all.
and you know the crazy thing about it is, as I was reading Chain Gang All Stars, I was the little footnotes he has in the book. If you read
Ooh.
those and you like, so he'll do like a footnote for like you know, the prison companies. But if you Google them, those prison companies are real, and they are actual prison companies. They are actual for profit prisons, and they actually do have as many prisoners as he says they have. So like the biggest prison, the biggest prison,
With the Attica.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was like G, it was an acronym.
Oh,
Um,
like the GEON or whatever it was.
Yeah, something like that. So like he would like some of them have changed their acronyms a little bit. I don't know. Their acronyms are not exactly the same, but they have the general same name as they do in the book. And so the one that he says is the biggest for-profit prison system in the US. It's actually the biggest for-profit prison system in the US. And so this like he is kind of like supposed to be like dystopian, but it's kind of like a real, and obviously there aren't like actual prison fight, not prison fight, like gladiator type fight
Yeah.
ring going on, but
I
it's very
mean, inside them, yeah, but especially like not on a national scale. But it gave me, honestly, it gave me, I don't know how to, because I don't want to reduce it to Black Mirror, but it gave me the same feeling that I get
yeah.
when I watch
I
Black Mirror,
I
where it's like
I think
if y'all show this to the US too much, they might just do it in 5 to 10 business years. Like
it
it feels like something that could be a very real possibility. And like I guess more it feels like I guess more than a possibility. It feels like that inevitably is going to happen. So it's interesting to kind of like have it in the thought process now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that the book really did give a really big Black Mirror vibe to the Chengeng All Stars, and I think that in some sense that it is like a good and a bad thing. I think based on like how resolved I felt at the end and um uh how much I wanted like more of the story at the end, because like it when I was reading it at the end I was like, oh, we're stopping here, like, and I was like
Yeah,
I was realizing as I was like getting closer to the end, I was like realizing where it was gonna end, and I was like wrestling with my emotions about how it was gonna end and what how I would feel about the resolution. And if there's the one place that the book kind of misses the mark for me is the ending. I think that and that's also my problem with Black Mirror is I think that um while the episodes are like really nice and they are at the end of the day they are self-contained, and I think that um e- that's kind of why I don't watch Black Mirror anymore. It's just like they kind of like have like these great setups, great premises, great ideas. They have a lot of times great stories, but they don't the ending doesn't always hit the mark for me, or sometimes some of the newer ones. I watched one of the newer ones, just the only good part is the ending, but
Mm, I can't watch that newer season. I have no. It feels like ever since it got bought by Netflix, it just is a different show and a different vibe. Like I loved me a little good three episodes season one, season two. I think when I got to season three, I was like, yeah, this is probably the season where I'm gonna tap out. And I think I maybe tried to watch like a couple minutes of this last season. I was like, you know what, it's just not for me.
yeah, I think that they kind of tap the well on like ideas in a way. I don't want to say that
Yeah.
because I think that the machine behind it. I mean, there was just a different energy when the season came out. Like you could kind of tell that it just wasn't gonna be a return
Yeah.
to form the way a lot of people wanted it to be a return to form.
Yes. It feels like somebody was like, actually, let me step in. Y'all can't go too far with this. And so it feels like it kind of got reined in. Like I feel like
Also, like
there
I
was
don't think
so
some of
much possibility explored in every single episode in the first and second season. And then after that, it felt like it kind of settled into the same pattern. Like you were
Um,
talking about, like there's only so much now. I feel like they're taking the same material and recycling it in a new direction, same main branch. And it's like you can only do this so much.
and it also kind of feels like the ideas aren't as expansive as they were at the like if you like think about like the episode that what's his name get out
Oh, Daniel Kaluuya.
the one that Daniel Kaluuya was in, right? Like that
I didn't
that
even know he was
episode
in
is
this.
so like interesting and well engineered and
Oh,
well out and like and where like he's like um trying to lose
was that
weight
the point?
as like a part of yeah he's like trying to lose weight as part of like this game show, right, where like basically he's like a contestant. They're like basically like prisoners. I don't remember the exact setup of it, but like and like he falls in love with this girl or he like tries to get
They had to bike for points, and then you get like you earn the opportunity or whatever to go to the
I mean
main
it's a
stage.
lot like it doesn't give like prison
But
vibes, but it's very much gives prison vibes
yes, and
about it.
you
Like
get
thinking
that
back
like
on
the
it.
influencing drink too. So like they go, I guess they go where the judges want them to go. So she had ended up somewhere where she wasn't supposed to. Yeah, because he had gone on and then he was like threatening to like kill himself on TV. And then they turned that into a show. I remember that's how it ended. They turned it into a show of like him being like, we have to rule against this. Anyway, I'll see you next week at 7. I remember that.
Yeah, and that kind of was like the vibe that the ending of Chang'e kind of gave me, where it's like it like he presents all these problems about the system, and then in the end, there's like no like it would be different if like I
I
didn't feel
think,
like there was gonna be any like movement to like end the system, even though
yeah,
like like
for me, it sort of almost felt in poor taste, or like it was undermining what the narrative was supposed to be, to have the climax of the story. Like I was saying this before in the Discord in text, but like how it didn't like it like resisted indulging in the like games as an entity, because like it could very easily, because like this sort of happens with like other like battle royale sort of things, and like the reason why people go and buy a ticket to go and see a battle royale themed thing, a battle royale style show, is to watch the kills and like indulge in the violence. And I thought it sort of undermined the thing to have the climax of the story be the big fights at the end. So I was a little disappointed that like that's how the like that was like the climax was the fight between them. I'm like, okay, surely it can't go here. Like this story isn't about who's gonna win the fights and what the outcomes of the fights are gonna be, because that's like a narrative device within the story is the like blood sport tournament thing and like being invested in who's gonna win and stuff like that. And the book is supposed to like the narrative is supposed to exist beyond that. So I feel like it was a disservice to have the story end in a fight, basically.
Yeah, and I think I don't
I
know if he was trying to make a point about like I don't know, like the grandness of the system or something, and how like it I just don't know, like it didn't I felt so conflicted at the end because kind of wanted I feel like I kind of wanted there to be more of like a statement about like how the story would go going forward. Like if because it's a because he brings up such big topics and he did such great world building, right? In order for me to feel satisfied at the end of this book that I know is not going to continue, I want there to be some sort of call to like how the story would finish out if he did like sort of because it's kind of like a cliffhanger because like
mm,
he like sets up like this big protest movement and all these things going on with
Yes.
the
And
characters
then
outside.
nothing happens from the pros. Like they were like, okay, we're just gonna go now. I was like, y'all just were huddling around
like,
and then you left?
and you see like the situation where they like basically televise someone getting influenced and stuff like that,
Yes.
and
That's
like I'm like, okay, okay, so this is where the story is gonna go, and then
that
immediately after they're just like have a standard fight between the two,
yes.
like I'm gonna say the two main characters, although that can
Cause
be
yeah,
debated. There's quite a
yeah.
few characters.
That's why I said it kind of felt like a Black
Weird.
Mirror. So it kind of felt
It
like
like
this
when we're
Black Mirror,
going
Yeah.
somewhere, and then it's just
which is kind of
Yeah.
crazy
It,
because
it,
the book
that
we
is
felt like
close out
that
with a
could have
big
been the
high stakes fight, and it's
that
like,
felt like it could
oh,
have been the climax right there. Was like the way
okay,
they went from being completely silent because it was like when the silence came from what Mari being influenced, and then when the silence came from the announcement of the season 33 twist where they had to fight each other. It felt like those were very very poignant moments, and I think it was honestly it felt like a nod to how people perceive violence, and like I think they've made that note in the book too about how like if you perceive someone being harmed, it's like, oh my God, like I got, someone's being harmed. But if you're like, oh, a criminal is being harmed, it changes the way people think about it.
mm,
And it felt like there was that silence. And then right when they went to that next battle royale, like when it was, Stax and Thurwar against each other, all of a sudden the crowd was just like back in uproar. I thought it was going to end there, where it was like, everybody was silent. Everybody thought, they thought something was going to happen, and then they get to the battle, and it's just the same old thing. Like it is the same. Nothing has changed. And
yeah,
I
and
thought
it
it was
was
going
like,
to end there. I wasn't expecting to actually get the battle. I low key like, and then when they got there, honestly, when they kissed, I definitely was getting like Katniss and Peter vibes. I'm not gonna lie.
yeah, I was like they were
I was
gonna
like,
do
I thought
that
something
I
thing
was
was
where
gonna
about
they
to
happen.
say that. I
Oh
was
my
like,
God,
I
where
it's
thought
gonna stop. It's gonna
they
stop.
just
But
refused
no,
to
what if they
they
kill
just
together?
refused to
What if, like,
kill. I was expecting like maybe even like a tragedy where they just sort of like refuse to kill each other,
yes,
and
I thought they
then
were both gonna be
the
terminated.
government just steps in
Why
and
in hell am
executes
I
them.
killing somebody?
The government just steps in and executes them because they
Mhm.
refuse to kill each other, and everyone's like, oh, that was like really, really,
Exactly.
really bad television and
Yes.
kind of haunting. Like that would have been that like their protest would have been just being executed by the government, and everyone's like, oh, that was that leaves me
Exactly.
with a horrible sinking feeling. These
Yes.
murder
And like,
that wasn't the murder game experience I would have liked.
yes. And it like
Like,
I was expecting it to be exactly that. Like, because when I got the Katniss and Peter vibes, I was like, okay, in the Hunger Games, they like the reason everything kind of kicked off is because they were like, oh my God, well, we can't kill these two people because that would be terrible. Whereas with this book, I felt like they absolutely could have continued that and been like, well, yeah, we're actually gonna kill him. And then they would have killed him.
mm,
And like
like
it would have had an uproar. But I feel like
it's
especially
not for
because
kids, so like it
and
has like the
especially yes,
miserable
so because
it
that protest died down so quickly, both in the old town and also in the actual games, I feel like a really poignant ending could have been, yes, they actually terminated both of them right there.
mm,
But then the very next battle, they would have been like the crowd would have been like, oh well, let's go watch another battle. Like that would have been really poignant right there to point out like, yes, there is
mm,
violence to the point where it will dissatisfy the audience, but the audience will always come back. There will always be an audience, no matter what you do to the people they're watching. Because that,
yeah,
like, especially considering where America's at, like violence for the sake of violence and spectating for the sake of violence, it feels like that is something that will never end. We see that kind of with like the surveillance and the display of Black Death, where it's like, you know, people will always take videos of everything all the time now. And it's like that doesn't really spur anyone to action anymore. If anything, people are like, oh my God, that happened. I want to see it. I want to see it. I want to see it. And they'll be like, wow, that was super, super brutal. Does anybody have another angle? Like that's what that would have given, I think, if they had that kind of ending.
Hmm.
And I think it also would have underscored like how like at least in the system that he presents in the book, it seems like they like very few people, if any, have ever made it out. So it's like the way that they dangle the freedom over these people's faces and they don't actually give it to them. And like
Yeah.
it also alludes to like how these people come into this as a way to a lot of them come in as a way of like a suicide, right? Like they want to die.
Yes, like literally, like it's better than the prison industrial complex to
Well,
go on
yeah,
that for the
especially
rest of your life.
they've like literally invented super tasers that just create
That
that
yes,
induce a fictional. There is like the human brain has like a parameter within it can experience pain, and it just goes whatever the maximum integer for that is, it does that, and it
yeah.
just
I
makes
mean
you. It just
that
hits you with max level pain
and
by
it
like
reminded
gimping your
me,
brain.
yeah, it reminded me of my actually one of my friends who has I forgot exactly what it's called, but it's like one of the if not the most painful disorder that is like known to the medical field, and they consistently call it the suicide disorder because well, I don't know if it's the suicide disorder so much as the suicide condition because
It's not
it
like
just it's to
multiple
be the pain. Yeah,
sclerosis,
the
is
pain
it?
is so unbearable that people would rather be dead. And so it made me think a lot about that because it's like, yes, like the honestly, I do definitely understand the concept of the brain being able, like not being able to process the pain that's going on. And so the pain kind of becomes the entity that you are is just pain. And also it made me think about how like some people do experience that in real life. Like there was a disability activist who was, you know, disabled herself, and she had a similar syndrome. And like she was on TikTok a lot. And one like some of the last videos were her just like openly being in so much pain that she could barely breathe or speak. And then she unfortunately did pass away shortly after that. But it was like that's what it made me think about is that sometimes even the man-made horrors cannot top what our bodies are capable of. And so to be like to see the influencer, it just made me think of like anything that the body can put people
Mm.
through, like multiplying that times 10, it really put into focus. I think the more they described it, the more it put into focus how like Simon J. Kraft, and then putting, I mean, even prisoners and folks that exist in the real world now, how pain can really shape you into obedience, not because you want to, but because it is so hard to come back from such a vast and such an intense and permeating type of torture. Like
Mm.
eventually it's really hard to maintain your sense of self when you've been tortured for so long. That was very point, and especially like that I don't remember if it was a footnote or not, but when they were talking about how Simon and Singer thought they were going to be the only two people on the chain, and in reality, it was because their entire like prison industrial complex back there was being investigated because there should have been no way that Simon J. Kraft would have should have been able to enter the system at all, given
Yeah.
he was not like mentally fit, which is wild because they want like the way that whole thing was run. Ooh, we.
Yeah.
Mm, what a
Yeah,
book.
it like it was that's why I was so disappointed at the end because I was just really enjoying it for the majority of it, and I just really thought that he was gonna think of something like really impactful for the end.
Yeah.
I
The
felt
fact that the climax of the book, so to speak, was the like murder games sort of felt like it was undermining what the intention of the author was. Like
Honestly, he
the
might have
the
been
climax
subverting it
needed
and
to
making us the
exist.
spectator, though.
Yeah, the climax needed to exist beyond the murder games, I think. Uh,
yeah, I think that for me that I guess it's just the fact that there's just so much about how like Thor is not gonna kill another one of her partners, and
And then
like,
boom.
and then she ends up doing just that. I think there's just like something. It just I
I
just
mean,
kind
her
of
and her partner taking away her agency in that too.
yeah, and I think that it is supposed to. I think it is supposed to, talk about how hard the system is to overcome, and how at that moment the one thing she wanted more than anything else was her freedom, and it's, I think that then how she just couldn't let herself be let herself die. Like she just had to fight for her own survival. And I think that there is something. I think that maybe what he was trying to do was invoke the sadness of the prison industrial complex and the inevitability of it. But I think that I think there was an opportunity to have a more not even satisfying ending, but like a more uh I don't know what's the word, defiant, like a more defiant ending than something that capitulates to the system that he was sort of building up to be like the boogeyman, or like the antithesis of the book. And so like it's kind of like at the end the bad guy wins, which is like it's a, like you said, it's like a subversive kind of thing. um but it feels a little bit like I would have been okay with it if there was like a sequel or something, right? But I think because
Yeah,
I know
because I want
that
to see what happens to Thor. Yeah, because like they both wanted freedom, but in the same way, they both wanted to like not be alive rather than go out into the society. And it was like one of them got freed through death. The other one has to go back into the world after she has talked about how she doesn't want to go back into the world because she's not the same person. Not
there was
necessarily like she
there
wasn't
was
just gonna
that
she wasn't the
ongoing
same
theme of
person
like
in there,
there
but it's
was
like, yeah, like how do you?
there
Because
was
I
several
that was the thing
examples
for me.
of
Like she didn't want to
links.
be there anymore. Like she didn't want to be out, but she didn't want to be in either. And so the fact that she was forced to be out, like I think if Stacks had won, it was like okay, that makes a little bit more sense because it's like everybody's back in the chain. I mean, still the same thing. Like the chain continues, the games continue, everything's still shit. But like Thurwar specifically getting out, I think that's what I was like, damn, like that's it. And then especially like you said, no continuation at all. Like that's just where it ends. It's like
and like, and
wow,
maybe he will write a sequel. I don't know. I just
yeah, this was
this
there's no
person.
imagination for me here. I just know that Thorwar's sad. Like I just know that she's upset and she hates every part of life. Like that there's nothing I guess we talked about how there's some authors that leave things to the imagination and like allow you to create this whole new world. And it's like I feel like I know exactly what happens to Thorwar. She's not happy one bit.
And I
Yeah,
think that
because like there was the also just the theme of like Link's getting really close to High Freed and then just opting to die instead.
Yes. Because they don't want none
Like
of them want to be
that was a
out.
theme. Because
Yeah,
they're
and that
like
was like it felt like a punishment more than a relief.
also I was just thinking like maybe they just like they do the thing, I think it's in the movie Gladiator, where they just like poison the Link before the fight so that they automatically lose it, and it looks like they just like they rig the fight so that they always lose the high freeing fight because
Wow.
like but in what world does it go like, oh, you're a murderer, oh, that's no good, what if we make you murder tons of other violent criminals, and then if you murder enough of them you get to go out into society again? That's
As a murderer
wow,
times 11.
what a great rehabilitative process this system is. Like, if you murder enough people, then you get to not be a criminal anymore. Like, yes, this is a system that is fundamentally concerned with like keeping people safe. It's
yeah, it's
just
like what with us. It's
like
like an
under
example of
what
like what the system
illusion?
would rather do than like actually rehabilitate the prisoners, because
Hmm.
obviously, like, when you do something like that, the point is that those people are going to go out into the world again, and then they're going to recommit a crime, and then they'll be
And
back
then end up
back in the
back in.
system.
and then they do a victory lap. Like it's sort of like their time back in the murder games again is like sort of considered like a victory lap, or it's like a drag race all stars that like they start doing things with like people who have reoffended. That could have been
Yeah,
interesting.
and it's wild because like I mean, if you think about all the people that made it close to High Freed, all of those people
The
at
person
some
that
point in the book,
the beginning of the first chapter, the fight, the first Thor's first fight where
it was
um
Melancholia. Yeah,
yeah, where she basically is commits suicide and it's like, well, she doesn't commit suicide, but she throws the fight in a way to Thor in order to, like, you
to
know,
escape.
to escape the system. And I think that
Mm.
it one thing I did really enjoy about the book is the way that it humanizes the worst offenders in the system in a way that I think that a lot of abolitionist sort of fiction tries to focus on the people that are wrongly convicted instead of trying to focus on the abolition and the need for
The need
um,
for rehabilitation rather
the
than
rehabilitation, the need
yeah.
to get the people out that are actually that committed the worst crimes, and to humanize people who've committed horrible crimes, and to think about the reason,
Mm.
the systems behind the fact that they committed
Yes,
this
and
crime.
to find the communal solutions
This
exactly.
is this is really interesting, especially recently, because like I've been talking with a bunch of people online, because like
The
at the
conversation
time
we're
of
having.
recording this, the conversation about the person who's
O'Shea,
recently
I think
murdered
his name's
in
right.
New York, and everyone's like, "Oh yeah, I hope he goes to prison and gets like R-worded and stuff." Like they're like talking about like punitive R-word, and I'm like,
Like
yeah, and
that
it's
is
just
not yeah.
how do you talk about, and it's like this person's it's like how do you talk about this in a way where it's like, guys, we need to consider the feelings of the violent homophobe in this situation, and it's like,
I mean,
yeah,
it's because it's like if you
because you
and
had
I think that was one of the poignant things because like
the
for
news
me,
reporter in the
when they
story was saying this
yeah,
sort of thing as well.
yeah. And so it's like when I was thinking about like who would win, because I was trying to like, especially when it was the what is it called? The duel, when it was 2-on-2, and it was Singer and Simon J. Kraft against Stax and Third War. I was thinking about what would happen if Singer and what's it called? And Simon J. Kraft won. And it was like if Simon J. Kraft ever became high freed, there would be no good in that. He doesn't know, like he's no
Mm,
longer himself. He taught like, especially when we get the points from his perspective, he's like, I am pain, I am Simon J. Kraft, and I have good angel. Like that was pretty much all the thoughts after he
mm.
had been influenced for so
He
long.
was so,
And he
that
also
story
well,
was so sad.
because he also like he
that
would
one made
jump
me
every single
cry.
time. Yeah, so
That
he
one
would
made
like
me
he would
cry
jump
when he
every
just like
single time
stopped
that he got
fighting.
like triggered. So it's like every single time he heard a sound or something, he's already jumping. And so it's like if he gets high freed, it was a I mean that felt like a great example of like what happens with punitive action and then just letting somebody out. If he gets
Mm,
triggered or something, like even if he just hears a sound that he doesn't recognize, he's going to kill that person once he gets out. That is what's going to happen because that's all he does now. He literally had somebody on his team that was like, anybody that isn't me, you kill. And then that
mm,
person, like, especially even if that person hadn't been killed, if he got high freed and that person is no longer next to him, like that is all he knows right now. And so it was like, for me, that was a kind of a one-to-one comparison. It was like, of course, punitive action isn't going to work. You got people out here that would rather die than keep going and actually get free. And you've got people who and that's the same point that I wanted to make is that like at every turn, I feel like we saw all of the links that were getting close to high freed have some sort of trauma response in that way. And it made me think about all of them. Like, if any of these people ever get free, like, I mean, I would love for them to get free, but also if any of them ever got free, the trauma responses alone are going to land them back here
mm,
because all of their responses are to go ahead and, take care of whatever the problem seems to be. So it
mm.
definitely drove that point home.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
one thing that is good about reading this book, and was good about reading this book in tandem with Andrew Davis's memoir, is that I really got to think about the way that her memoir sort of talks about these issues in a similar way, whereas but actually like talks about the systems that provide for these, and the Changing All Stars kind of does it in by way of like telling the stories of like the prisoners, but like the way that Angela Davis talks about how like the system has failed all of us and how the system creates these criminals, and then so to punish them alone for the crime that was instigated by the system is in a way a miscarriage of justice, because it doesn't solve the actual problem, right? It
Yeah, like under the system, violent criminals are just going to be a renewable resource. There's always going to be more violent crime, so you're not keeping anyone safe. Like, no one becomes more safe because you've incarcerated someone who's committed
there's something
assault or something like that.
It's especially like how like violence towards others. Like I'm thinking of like, you know, rape, right? That always gets a shorter sentence than say someone just doing like petty theft, someone doing like maybe grand larceny. All of a sudden that person's getting decades and decades. Whereas like the folks that need the rehabilitation the most, which is already not going to be rehabilitation in prison, but that's going to be like a 3 year sentence at best. You know what I mean? Like it's not like anything actually happens at all. On top of like what Angela Davis was talking about, I feel like what I saw a lot in Angela Davis's autobiography was that like the state will keep you in its care or pursue you for as long as it wants. It's like once you are in the eyes, like once you are in the sight of the state,
right.
in the sight of the prison industrial complex in general, but in the sight of the state, that is no longer like that's it for you. Whether or not you live a quote unquote full life after that, you don't ever stop being in the state's crosshairs. It's like at any moment they could take you, they could take anybody associated with you, because at one point in time you cross paths. Like that's all it takes pretty much.
And one
And
thing
it's like
that
it feels like the Black community in general is a crossed path, if you will. But it's like not a cross path of our own free will. It's a cross path because y'all are tired of us not being slaves anymore. And you're tired of seeing us talking about how we're tired of being slaves. It's like that feels like the cross path is that we don't quote unquote know our place anymore. You know what I mean? Like that's what
And
it feels
also
like.
just like having like a feared minority, it just serves a functional purpose to holding on to power and stuff like that. Like
Yeah.
there is a utilitarian purpose to having segments of the
Yes, it feels
population
like yes, the
targeted.
greater good involves Black people always being at the bottom, and that's not the case. But they sell it a hell of a way. It seems like it doesn't sell to me. But I'm also a Black person, so I might have a different perspective. But like it doesn't seem beneficial to me. But apparently, it seems beneficial to everybody else that wants to perpetuate the caste system that we have in this country. It is mind blowing to me every time. Like it's not it's like I said, it's the same thing. It's a straight line, and also it is still unbelievable to me.
yeah, and it's hard because you never want to start with like we never want to start abolition with the people that are harming the community. But those are sometimes the people that need abolition the most, because let's say, for instance, if we go to the O'Shea who was murdered by a Muslim, right?
And a 17-year-old at that.
That person was incited to violence. And when we, you know, take that this Muslim kid who murdered him, yes, in cold blood, murdered him for nothing, right? But it incites a this is really hard to say, but it incites a sort of war of ideology between like we can see it so clearly happening, right? I got an argument on Twitter um with these people who were saying that these kids who were tearing down pride flags, right? These Muslim kids who were tearing down pride flags, they were like, oh, throw the book at them. So I want these kids arrested, prosecuted, and it's this is what the oppressor wants. It wants us to
it's like
advocate
They have no nuance. They
for
have no nuance and be a black and white. Yeah.
they want us to throw these Muslim kids into the system in order to fuel the discord between Muslim people and queer people, because the white supremacists have now realized that there are not enough people on their side. So what they're doing is they're not including they're
They're
not
not
including
including they're dividing.
they're not
They're just
including the
breaking
Muslims
everyone
in
down.
their fashion. They're not including Muslims in their in their definition of whiteness, the way they did with a lot of the other communities. What they're doing is they're including them in their religious fascism in a way that they say, "Oh, we hate the queers. You guys also hate the queers. Let's bring you in, and you be on our side." And now, as queer people advocate for the arrest of your community, you can see that they're the problem. The queer people are the problem. They're ruining our society, and then
And like, look at the queer people. They're causing all this violence, and it's like, hello.
and what I see is that it saddens me that the only option a lot of queer people see to for justice is prison, right? Is punitive justice. And so instead of trying to help this child who is clearly religiously indoctrinated in a way that, and he thinks that it's his duty to murder this queer man who is just experiencing happiness, that we would think that the solution to that problem is to inflict more violence. And I think that there is this thing that, okay, we understand that the prison industrial complex is a problem, but this one time we can use it to do this one good thing.
You ate that one thing, prison industrial complex. It's just
Yes, and I
it's
think
not
that
And
the
it's like
serve you
people. I feel like
think it
people don't realize that
is.
it can be like you let that one thing in, and it's going to be an avenue for all these other things. It's like when people are like, it feels like the same concept that's going on with like the ageism that's going on. People are like, oh, well, I think old people should not be in office unless it's these conditions. And it's like, okay, now you're opening the door to people saying old people should not be in office or vote. And that's the conversation. That's where the conversation's starting to head now. And it's like, because we let it in this one spot, now it's showing up everywhere. And like the same type of ageism where the people are, and ableism where people are like, oh well, they're gonna have to, after this certain age or this certain whatever, they want to talk about medical records, they want to talk about testing and stuff. And it's like, do you not see how that's going to impact older queer people, older black people, older disabled people? Like all the people
It's
that you
always
want
gonna
to be able
slap
to
your
have these
wrist twice
access
as
to these
hard.
things are gonna be like basically called out. And it's like we gotta think. It's like the nuance, like you were talking about, like there feels like it's just let's do this thing instead of let's talk about what potential, like what potential harm could lead from this action, and let's go for a different approach. Is very, very punitive and never really restorative, rehabilitative, communal, any of it.
And it's like they want the same system that would prosecute queer people for sex crimes to provide justice to us. And it's like, I get that this may provide some sort of catharsis to you, but I think we need to take a step back and look at the bigger picture about what what the violence that the prison system is going to wreak to not just this boy but his family who has done nothing wrong. And I mean, in some way his family is indoctrinating him, right? So but it's not,
But
it's just
punitive is
like,
not going to help anybody.
it's not going
It's
to
not going
help
to do
him. It's
anything
just
but
going to,
spit him out a couple years later,
and then
possibly worse than he
it's gonna breed more violence. Like that person, that community that killed O'Shea, it's not gonna instantly like realize, oh well, we shouldn't have done that because now somebody's going to jail for it. It's not.
If anything, they're going to be like, this is a violation of my freedoms, I'm going to fight back against this. It's like
Or
this is just gonna be
they will martyr this boy. They will. You'll see it in the media. People are going to use this people are going to use this case where this queer person was killed, and they're going to martyr him the same way they martyred that they're not going to martyr him in the same way because as they murdered that guy who killed that protester, all those protesters.
Yeah, I was about to say, I'm seeing a
Kyle
lot of
Rittenhouse, yeah.
Kyle Rittenhouse, yes. They're not going to martyr him in the same way
history
because
doesn't repeat itself, but it
he was a white kid.
rhymes.
They're not going to because he was a white kid, a white Christian kid. They're not going to murder him in the same
Yeah,
way.
that's
But
they're
they will
not gonna martyr
absolutely
him
they will
as
absolutely martyr him. They
they're
will
gonna martyr him
absolutely
as an
martyr him.
ideology. Yeah.
And it's gonna become a thing where, like I said, the system is only gonna rot more violence. It's only gonna rot more violence. And I think that this is gonna instill a false trust. If he is convicted, it will instill a false trust in the system amongst queer people. And and what people need to realize is that same system wants to imprison you. It wants to imprison you. It wants to imprison it would
Like the
if
system doesn't work for you.
if that boy didn't kill O'Shea, this same system would have tried to find a way to arrest O'Shea for doing the same thing that he was doing, right? This same system wants to say, hey, queer people experiencing life are indoctrinating youth, and therefore are we going to arrest these
Yeah,
people
it's like
on the streets? And it's not it's sad that
the most
you
insane
know
thing ever.
Like
It's just
O'Shea,
like
literally, like you're talking about, that would have happened in
if
Florida.
you're
If
if
O'Shea
you're
was in Florida, that would have happened in Florida. He would have been arrested in Florida.
if he
if
was in
you're
Florida,
publicly
this case
happy and
happened in Florida.
healthy,
If his
you're
case happened in
threatening
Florida,
children.
he would be getting acquitted because in Florida they would have said that he was standing his ground and he felt threatened by
Exactly,
the
and that's
fact
what. So that's
he
what I'm
was.
saying is like he would be like the killer would be acquitted, but like we were talking about, like if he hadn't killed O'Shea, O'Shea himself would have been in prison for all of the laws and stuff that they're trying to pass in Florida. So it was like you're talking about, like that system.
We want to. We expect the system that acquits people who kill trans women for being trans to acquit to prosecute this boy who killed a queer person and for being queer, right? And once it becomes clear that they to the media that he killed him for being queer, it's not gonna go the way that people want it to go, and it's not gonna make you feel the way you think it's gonna make you feel if he is acquitted. And I think that as
And
as
we're in such
people
a
as queer
polarizing
people, we have to
society.
be very careful. We have to be very careful about the system that we idolize and what we call for when we call for justice. And even as Black people, I think that, you know,
So many
something
black
that's
folks are
always
deep in
gnaws
the
in the back
prison
of my head.
system. And I'm like, do you know how many black people are in the system? Why are you believing in that system? Don't we have so much scholarship on that system and how it is bad. How are you wanting that system? Is
Yeah,
And I know we're not all in the same place ideologically and stuff. Like there's so much to it. And like even just speaking on that ideological part, I remember Angela Davis in her biography or in her autobiography, she was talking about how there was so much infighting between groups that generally had the same overarching ideals, but because some folks were misogynist or like some folks were this and that and the other, they were trying to tear each other down. And it's like, how? And I feel like that's honestly what's going on when we were talking about earlier about how like right before we were talking about like martyring this man and everything, it feels like instead of the government is no longer trying to have people bond over white supremacy so much as they're encouraging all these divisions between all these different communities. Like, I mean, we're watching the trans community continue to fall apart because white trans people are continuing to be racist. We're watching the black community get splintered and fall apart because it's black first. So no black disabled people, no black women, no black poor people, no black queer people, no black trans people. It's like I feel like we're watching everything get fractured in the blink of an eye. And I guess it seems so clear here where it's like like we are losing community. Once we lose community, once we're all fractured groups, of course it's going to be a lot easier for white supremacy to come in, because that is a unified force and we are now fractured groups. And it's like, but when you want to talk about it, then like I know a lot of Black folks are like, oh, the reason like we are down as a race is because of Black queer people and because of Black trans people. And I'm like, y'all don't want to open your eyes a little bit more? Like you don't want to how you get stuck how you get stuck in the trees for the forest, and it's not even the right trees. Like it no.
Like how it's how Black cis women want to tear down Black trans women instead of the system,
Yes,
instead of focusing on the misogyny, instead of focusing on all the systems that tear Black women down. They're like, oh,
and you want to
make sure we get.
What is wild is that they were literally trying to define personhood. Conservatives were trying to define personhood, and they were like, fetuses are people, and people should have rights. And at the same time, and I honestly was so glad that conservatives did not catch on to it, because what cis women were doing were saying, I am not a person, because people were like, people with vaginas, people with breasts. They were like, I am not a person, I'm a woman. And I was like, do y'all not see how
Oh
this is
my
going to go very
gosh.
badly for? Because it was the same thing with like bodily autonomy.
Right.
Like that the way that fell apart with like, they're like, oh, well, trans folks shouldn't have bodily autonomy. I'm gonna vote against trans folks having bodily autonomy. And they said, great. You also cannot get an abortion now. And they were like, oh my God, how did this happen? What do you mean, how did this happen? And here you are talking about, oh, I'm not a person. And conservatives are arguing that fetuses are people. I'm like, this is not gonna. That's what I'm saying. Like, I'm so glad they didn't catch on to that, because that would have been so disastrous. And on top of that, they would have blamed it on trans women. Oh, child, let me use the bathroom real quick. I will be right back.
It's so interesting watching people be just like turn against their own self-interest for the stuff like that. And it's like it's always about like, how can I duplicate white supremacy so that it serves someone of my identity? I want white supremacy, except it serves the identities I embody. That seems to be the consistent through line with this sort of thing.
I
It's
was
sort of
watching
like, how do I get white supremacy except it serves me, a cisgendered woman? How do I get white supremacy, but it serves me, like heterosexual Black male and stuff like that.
Yeah, I
It's
was
always
watching
about
this
like,
video by Olayemi, and you might have seen her because I retweet her a lot, but she did this video with a bunch of queer people about the the laws that are being made against queer people. And one thing someone on the panel said is that they don't, I think she said it, they don't hate capitalism, they hate their place in capitalism. They don't hate the system, they hate their place in the system. They hate that they are not white men. They don't hate that the system upholds white men, right? So they want to be the white man. They like Black men, Black cis men, Black women, Black they white women, they want to be a white man. They don't want to abolish the system of white supremacy. They don't want to abolish patriarchy. They want equality to the white man within the same system. So which is one of the big problems that
and
we
then
get when
that's
it's constantly about what's that word?
and then you get people, the time old tradition of being one of the good ones, where you can have that equality sold to you for
Which I
your
hear is one of
allegiance.
some people's problems with Across the Spider-Verse is that scene where uh the propaganda scene where she's like, you're one of the good ones, Dad.
Oh yeah, yeah. That was
And
a
you're
that was an
like,
interesting
if you
one.
know anything about
And then when you're like, oh, you know,
And that like
and they're
immediately
like, oh my God, well now I see why everybody doesn't like your demographic. Hello? Like what do you I thought
yeah, that
I thought you were
immediately
one of the
following
good
that.
ones and the allies, but like let me give you one little piece of critique. That's why nobody likes you blacks. Huh?
Ah,
It
that
is
yeah,
so
just
wild watching that crack happen. That's why people are always so wary of critiquing allies. And then allies will go out and just say some wild shit. And it's like, let me critique just a
Happens
teeny
every
bit.
single time.
And you gonna tell me that's why people don't like you Negroes.
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
mm,
Mm. And it feels like it's
It's
happening so often now. Because it's like you I think like you were talking about like just talking about white women specifically, they want access to the power. They don't necessarily want equality. They want equal access to that power and are willing
right.
to step on anybody else to get it. And so I feel like I was in a space earlier today and it ended up having a lot of white people. Ironically, it's called a racial healing circle. That is something I'll never get over. But like we frequently in the meetings with white people being like, I just don't know what to do. And every time I be in the chat talking about whatever issue today made you cry, because they always be crying. I'm like, whatever issue made you cry, type in that issue into Google plus your city. There is going to be something for you to do. Go do it. I'm like, if you want to do something else, if you want to ask your black friends how they feel about something, why don't you offer them any mutual aid in exchange? Be like, hey, I would love to rack your brain about this. If you've got the time, if you've got the energy, I can pay you, or like I could take you out to coffee. Every single time, I'm like, here are all the things that you can do instead of crying on this Zoom. And nobody ever does anything. They will come to the same meeting a week later and be like, oh man, I just don't know what I can do. Did you not do anything that we talked about last time? I don't care if you feel like there's nothing you can do. If we have whole documents, if we have whole suggestions that we put for you, and you want to keep coming here talking about, I feel so stuck. If you don't go out and give somebody $5 right now, because I know you got it. I know you got it. Or if you don't go out and like volunteer, do something, right? I talked to him about Black August today. And I was like, you literally can just like write to an inmate, make sure that they feel seen. You can put some money on somebody's books and they'd be like, oh, I just don't know where to start.
Google.
I'm like, you could start with literally any of the things I just told you. But literally, like Google, every time I tell them, whatever issue you got, Google that issue plus your city. There is going to be tons of resources for you. There are already groups working on this. You do not have to start anything from scratch. I know y'all love y'all grassroots agencies that don't do the same thing that anybody else does while doing the exact same thing. Y'all just be splitting funds because y'all don't want to talk to each other. But I can guarantee you there's already somebody doing something in your city. If you don't want to work with them and don't want to put in the energy, you can donate to them. But there is something for you to do. And every time it's like that same, like they get the access to power, and it's like they don't want to do anything to actually help anybody else up. And I'm like, if you don't want to help, if you don't want to do the work, just say that instead of coming here all the time talking about, I don't know what to do for the next 3, 4, 5 weeks. Just say that you don't want to do the work. Just go ahead and say it. Make everybody's job easy.
It's just white fragility. They want to be absolved of the guilt they feel for their participation in the system,
And I'm like,
and
you've been crying for an hour and a half.
it's just
What
like
what
hour and
now,
a
Patricia?
half. This is reminding me of the first few sessions of this book club where I was like 100% of the turnout. Like 50% of the Zoom calls population. I'm just like, hi.
I mean, listen, at least we're having the conversations here. I think that's another thing that gets me is that sometimes we end up having surface level conversations. They'll be like, I am holding your pain. Girl, you in a house in Washington. What are you talking about? Like, what are you talking
literally,
about?
literally talking to a black trans person in Texas and being like, "I'm
Literally.
holding your pain." Like,
You know what's funny to me? They'll be
how
like,
about you pay,
I can't
how about you
believe
pay one of
that.
my bills?
Literally.
How about you send me
Oh
some
my
aid?
God. Like we've it's so frustrating because it's like the thing that's really tiring me out right now is when people are like, I can't believe that's happening. I really don't give two shits if you don't believe what's happening you should do something about it anyway. Whether or not you believe, things are going on in Texas, that does not stop the things in Texas from going on. Like I had a conversation with my therapist, bless her heart, and we finally got it corrected a couple sessions later. But I had one talk with her. I was like, yeah, because she was like, you should told her something, and she was like, have you ever considered that you're autistic? I was like, yeah, girl. I just don't have the diagnosis, but I'm self-diagnosed. She was like, well, I would hold off on that, which is already a red flag. But I was like, I'm actually not trying to get a formal diagnosis because like the folks in Mississippi, the legislators in Mississippi were trying to pass that legislation to ban gender affirming care for minors. And then they wanted to expand it to banning gender affirming care for anybody that had diagnosed clinical depression or diagnosed autism. And I was telling her about that. And she was like, well, you don't want to get ahead of yourself. I don't think that's happening anywhere. And then I brought it up like the next session, and I think she had like seen it on the news finally. And she was like, yeah, no, that makes sense. Girly pop. One of these days, you just gonna have to take my word for it because I see it all the time. And that's what I
It's
was telling her. I was
we have
like,
been
as
saying
a Black trans person who is in danger all the time, I have to know these things. Like, especially as a Black trans person in Texas, my rights could change from one moment to the next. Like, I know I told y'all about how my 5-year reunion was at my college this year, and they asked me if I was going, and I was like, well, to get there, I have to cross through Arkansas. In Arkansas, if I use a bathroom that's not aligned with my biological sex, I will go to jail. I will just go to
and
jail.
you'll
And I
probably go
have
to
to drive 4
jail.
hours through
And
there
you'll
to
probably
get
go
to
to
jail.
jail.
And Tennessee at the time had a law in the books that banned drag performance in public. You get arrested for that. But the law was so vague that you could just arrest trans people in general. So I was like, y'all want me to be in 2 different states of danger. So no, I will not be going to the thing. And it was like, I don't know how to tell y'all that I have to be aware of all the laws in all the places I am going all the time because I'm not going to jail. If I get in the prison industrial complex as a trans person, I'm not making it out. Whether or not that means I'm not getting free because they're going to charge me with something, or I'm not getting free because they literally kill me, I'm not making it out. I'm already in like the last third of the average trans lifespan anyway. Our average lifespan is what, 35, 36 years? I'm turning 27 this year. I'm like, I'm not trying to get any closer to that average at all. And it's so wild to like tell my perspective and then people be like, wow, well, gosh, I can't believe that. And I don't give a rat's ass, Diane. It's still happening.
It's so frustrating to like be aware of it's so frustrating to be aware of this system and walk amongst people who are so oblivious to
Or deny it.
this system that is and it's like the world is gaslighting you and like you like almost nobody is talking about Cop City anymore while it's still going on. Mind you, they're actually getting a lot closer to stopping it than a lot of people
Yes,
ever think
exactly.
actually
Like they're
would.
they're getting the referendums and everything right now. Like the legislation that has been happening. And it's like if you that's the thing is that if you aren't tapped into those spaces, and that's what's so wild to me is that like some things I feel like are very widely circulated. So it feels like everybody knows about them. And then I realize it's only everybody in my circle. And then I'm like, okay, well, this shouldn't be an everybody in my circle thing. This I know I personally circulated it to people outside of my circles. So y'all should at least be aware of it. You shouldn't be going, huh? Every time I talk about Cop City. And it's the same thing with like trans rights and stuff and disability rights. They'll be like, I've never heard of this before. You talk to me all the time. I tell you about this all the time. What do you mean you've never heard of it? What have we been talking about for the last like 5, 6, 7 months? You ask me if I'm okay. I tell you it's a health hazard to exist where I'm at. I list the reasons. You go, oh, I didn't know about this. What did you just ask me 2 weeks ago? What did I just tell you 2 weeks ago? Scroll up in the chat. Like, or like even talking about Angela Davis's situation. I think I've had that conversation with my family before where I'm like, hey, these things are not only correlated, but these things are likely to happen if XYZ, like if you get into the prison industrial complex, if you have a brush with the law, blah, blah, blah,
Right.
like these things are going to happen. And they'll be like, oh, well, like, don't get too ahead of yourself. Like you're imagining things. You're getting ahead of of what's actually happening. That's not actually going to happen. And I'm like, and I'm reading a book. I'm reading an autobiography where that happened what 50, and that's 50 years ago, which is
Uh,
wild. But it's like this
happened
has
when
been
rent was $35 in what happened when rent was $35 in LA.
literally. I'm like, what do you mean that this? I'm getting ahead of myself, and this has already happened.
But that's one of the reasons why it's so important to read books like Angela Davis's autobiography, because so much of that history is erased. And I said this in my review of the book when I just posted it when I finished it. It was they this history of right after the death of Martin Luther King is obscured from history books because they want us to think racism ended when Martin Luther King marched on Washington,
And
and
they'll be like, "Oh my
then
God, I
and
can't
then
believe that he's gone. He died. He died. And how did he die? How did that one happen?"
they want you to think that racism ended with Martin Luther King Jr. and then Obama was president, and then it's like,
They
and
just
now we live in a post-racial society like that. That's kind of
post-racial
what
society with Donald Trump as the president. They'll be like, "Yeah,
right, but
we're past racism." Did he not just say that's his African American? Like, let's be very serious. Be very serious.
and it's that's a good one. I say it's so important to read books like this, like the memoirs of like Angela Davis or Audre Lorde, or um, read their work, read their current work, read the books. So many of the people that made things like that book possible, like reading the books of, like Malcolm X, and knowing how they are trying to limit the intellectualism that goes on in prisons, because prisoners are able to acquire this knowledge and to spread this knowledge about their own rights to freedom and their own rights. And
That's always the most
because
suspect thing is when they're like, no reading. Like that is
Or
always the
they
like
ban books that are like, oh, how to like not. I
that
mean,
should be
hypothetically,
setting
they'll
off
ban books
alarm
to be like
bells
how to
to
get through
most
prison. They'll be
people.
like that is propaganda.
Yeah.
And I mean,
I
personally,
in a
admit
like
way
finding
in
things
a way
accessible.
it is propaganda, because
And
the
it's like propaganda is needed because the prison industrial complex is fucked.
like all fiction, all books are propaganda, all everything is propaganda, every piece of media is propaganda. And
propaganda literally
like when the
means
people are like,
media.
"Oh, you are not immune to propaganda." Oh, I'm so big brain. Did you not just go to Wendy's to buy the 4 for $4 because you saw it on TV? Like, let's immune the
and it's
propaganda.
like we need to limit indoctrination. No, what you really want to do is have it so it's only your type of propaganda, only your type of indoctrination, because all media is indoctrination, all media is propaganda. And what is happening now is that
What do you feed into?
there is a rise in popular media about marginalized groups, and they want to limit that because they know that one of the best ways um to spread hate is to limit the people's understanding of those marginalized groups.
Yes.
So
Or to commodify and then
right,
de-radicalize. Because I mean, honestly, because it's happening now with Black Lives Matter turning to Blue Lives Matter, or like Wine Moms Matter, all those other things. But it also happened. Another example is literally the Hunger Games, when people were actually feeling like I know it's like a bunch of teenagers were reading that and they were reading the version and they were like, "Oh my God, like I'm feeling a little something something." And what did the US do? They were like, "You know what? You can actually be Katniss for Halloween. You want to buy her little suit?" Or they'll be like, "Here's the companion guide to talk about like what the symbols mean. You can buy these for $13.99."
They're
And
like
it's like
Hogwarts
they
houses.
commodified the rebellion in the book, and then the US was like, "You know what? Let's do
like
that."
what happened
And I'm
with
like, did y'all not read it? Did y'all not
One
just
thing
read about what
capitalism is
goes on in the
always
book?
gonna
They're
do
like,
is have
"Oh my
no
God, like
shame.
they're like the revolution will never be commodified. I will go as Katniss for Halloween." And I'm like, did you read the book or did you glance at the book? Because the one-to-one,
Also, like
it's also
turning
like the
things
same thing
into
that
Halloween
happened.
costumes should be like ground zero for not taking it seriously.
they'll be like, "Yeah, you two can be in the struggle. Or they'll like they would have like interactive like things. They'd be like, oh my god, for $5.99, you too can be Katniss.
Oh god.
And then when you say
For
something about it, they're like,
$5.99, you can step outside as a black person and be Katniss right the fuck now. I guarantee you that.
and then when you say something about it, they're like, "Oh, you hate fun." Like when you say that Mr. Beast
I was like, what do
turning,
you mean I hate fun? It's a dystopian novel.
Oh, the Mr. Beast thing.
like when Mr. Beast turned the Squid Game into like an actual competition, people were like, that's kind of, and that's kind of the antithesis of what the work is trying to do." And then people are like, "Oh my gosh, you guys hate anything that helped
Yeah,
Mr.
they'll be like, you hate
Beast."
fun. And
This
I'm
is,
like, okay, well, let's say you go into the Squid Games. Do y'all remember what happens in the Squid Games? Like they would be like, oh my God, like you guys should be contestants, blah, blah, blah. This seems like fun. And then when Mr. Beast starts letting people die in the Squid Games, they'd be like, oh my God, how can he let people die? What do you think happened in Squid Games?
This is
Do you think
like a
that
much
people
milder.
I'm like, do you think people played that glass platform game and then fell to their death? And then somebody was going to recreate Squid Games and someone would not fall through a glass platform to their death? Like, what do you think people are going to put the fun in Squid Games, or do you think they're going to make a replica of Squid Games?
It's just there was a much milder, lighter version of this with like the release of the Barbie movie with like one thing the Kardashians are gonna do is not read the room and just like she like had a like little like Barbie gathering with all of her like supermodel friends and like made it about having like a
Having the
gorgeous body, having the body, and it's like that was like not this is missing the point. Anyway, I was just thinking of that. Like one thing they get always gonna miss the point.
Like that, I think, and I know I said it before, but I want to modify it when I said that because I remember I was talking to y'all about how like I feel like the phrase "those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it." I remember I countered that by saying that I feel like people know their history and they're just working to do it better. I think it's both. I want to come back to that because I want to say I think it's both. I think that the people that are currently running things, quote unquote, do know the history and are working to do it in a better way and in a more powerful, more inflicting way. And at the same
like
time,
the way that
you were
South
talking about, I
Africa
think
created
because
apartheid, like the way that South
and the people
Africa,
that don't read the books, the people at our level that don't read the books don't know their history. So like the people down here are doomed to repeat it because the people up there know it and want to repeat it. Like
right?
I feel like it's now both of I think I see it better now. It's both at once.
Like how South Africa and Israel studied American racism and then used that to create apartheid
What was it?
community.
That like little historic anecdote of like Hitler going, "Oh man, it's a shame what happened to America."
I wonder.
It was looking good
It's
for
a
a
damn
bit
shame.
there,
How
but
did they do
then
that?
they
Step by
didn't go
step.
through with it. It's just the fact that like Nazi Germany can look at America and go, "You kind of ate."
Literally, they'll be like, "Wow, you guys are the blueprint." Like, I wonder if I could do that on like a worse scale. And it's
Hitler's telling
or like
you to cook
how the
should
US
be.
would be like, oh, like we just don't agree with the interests of this country. I think somebody said it great because they were talking about it was Zimbabwe for a while, and then it was no, it was oh god, it was two places that they were talking about, and they were talking about how they had recently discovered like very like precious metal, whatever the fuck precious metal means. They had discovered like a lot of precious metals in the area, and somebody made a very good tweet. It was a very succinct tweet. They were like, "You're about to start hearing about a lot of human rights violations in these areas." And like true to form, they're like, "Oh, these are human rights violations. Like we have to get our people over there. We have to make sure that we can instill democracy." What you mean instill democracy? Why don't you work on your own house, first of all? And second of all, like the way people fall for that propaganda, they're like, oh my God, like we need to create a rebellion and stage a coup. And then like terrible governments take power and they're like, oh my God, how could a terrible government take power? Like when, oh my God. Or like when people are like, yeah, we literally found US funded arms in like terrorist hands. And people are like, well, obviously they stole them from the good guy. At some point, it's gotta click. If you need to take the mouse, at some point it's gotta click.
going back to like a few steps with like the World War II stuff, I always have such a hard time. This is like similar to like you're talking about like your country, how your country's history is taught about like, oh yeah, racism ended after that one guy. And then I was just saying like how like World War II is sort of taught. It's like, yeah, like Winston Churchill had to stop Germany because they were racist. And it's like that absolutely wasn't on the list of priorities for any of the world governments. That no one had a problem with racism. It was just Germany was expanding, I think, and then like that like rocks the boat, and we don't like that. Like
Yes.
it like the white supremacy was a non-issue as far as most of the world governments are
Yes.
concerned.
And that goes back to slavery. If I have to hear a British person be like, well, we helped end slavery over here,
Oh well, that was very kind of you,
it,
Britain. Just
they'll be like, yeah, we ended slavery way before y'all did. And guess who started this country? And guess what the fuck y'all brought here from y'all's country? Like, it would be like me, and honestly, it's the prison industrial complex all over again. They'll criminalize things, and then they'll be like, well, we brought down crime. Bro, you created that as a crime. It's
that
like when they're like, yeah, we brought down marijuana sales. Who the fuck put marijuana as a Schedule 1 substance in the first place?
this is
Which one,
like
which
this
one
is
of y'all
how a
did
lot of
that? Did
like
the people on the ground do that? Did I do
this
that with my little measly vote, or did the FBI and the government do that?
a
This is
lot
gonna
of
get
like
like testosterone
non-Americans.
is a Schedule 3 substance. It is a controlled substance. Like we were talking about on this last book club meeting. If I ever get denied my T prescription, very likely in Texas, and I decided to make my own testosterone, hypothetically speaking, NSA don't give me, like that would be a felony because I'm manufacturing a controlled substance illegally.
And a lot of people
And
realize
that's a
they
lot
don't
of things
have
like
to
that.
make it a felony because it's already a felony.
Literally. And it's like the same thing with like weed. Like people are like, oh, it's decriminalized in my city. The federal government can still pick you up for a minimum 5-year sentence. Mandatory in federal prison. Because it being decriminalized in your city does not stop the fact that if the federal government wants to get you, they're going to get you. Whatever you think states' rights means, decriminalizing just means they won't have to arrest you. Like, that's the thing. Decriminalizing doesn't even mean that they can't arrest you for it. It means that they don't have to arrest you for it. It is still a Schedule 1 substance. You can still be arrested by the federal government for that substance. And I feel like a lot of people do not think about that. And it's like, I was saying this honestly in a TikTok the other day. It's like having cops at Pride in like a place where gay people are basically outlawed. Gay and trans people are basically outlawed. If that cop likes you, you will not get arrested. If that cop does not like you, you will get arrested because the law is only enforced when they want it to be enforced. It's the same
And it's
thing.
like
Like it,
this is how I've like tried to explain it to like non-radical people. It's just like, okay, so you go to work, right? Like like you're going to work, you work at like wherever it is. I don't know what a name of a shop is in the US, so I'm gonna say
job.org. Yeah.
like you're going to work at like Office Works, and you show up, and you have coworkers who are just like, it's day number like 478 on the job, and they're like, oh man, I'm tired, I'm just gonna like not do my job properly today. And it's like, that's what happens in law enforcement. Like, I don't understand why people go, I'm like, cops never like half-ass it, or like they're like never lazy or negligent or just cut
Right.
corners because it's easier for them. Like,
Yes. And taking
like
that analogy,
you wouldn't do that if you were a police
it's,
officer.
that's the
And I
thing. It's
like
like
work in a
you can take that
hospital, and
analogy
like
so much further. You can take that analogy way, way further. Like I can even give an example of what's happening in my job right now. Like Black people at my job are being discriminated against. I did put in my 2 weeks. I will be leaving, but like we have very strict rules about violating HIPAA. We had a Black woman, she no longer works here, but she had her kid come in the room during a meeting for just a second. Weren't even talking about HIPAA information. And she got scolded out of her ass because they were like, oh, you've been violating HIPAA, violating HIPAA. My white coworker, who has a much older daughter who can understand what we're talking about, has her daughter walk in the room all the time. Never once has my boss ever said anything about that to her at all. And it's like, that's the way I see law enforcement. That's the way I see the law in general. You see, it's the same thing where you see people in states where it's decriminalized and they have a functioning and like flourishing marijuana economy. And you still got people in that same state locked up for possession of that same substance. Like they're going to get whoever they want to get. And I think that I once again bringing that back to Angela Davis's autobiography, they're going to get you if they want to get you. No questions asked. Whether they disappear,
Or like
you,
to say
whether they
how
get you
in Angela
legally,
Davis's
whether they get you
biography,
illegally.
yeah, and like in Angela Davis's biography, she had the future president of the United States, Ronald Reagan, who personally made his vendetta to get her fired from her job as an LA professor, as a UCLA professor, saying that she was never going to teach in the state again, as a way to like personally criminalize her to keep her from spreading her message about abolition and about communism, right? And that's like the governor at the time of California was doing this to an adjunct professor at a university. Like
I mean,
that's
even you can
how.
take it further back, how that governor in Arkansas literally stopped Black people from going into schools.
Yeah,
Like,
in the
you want
Rock
to use
Nine, like
the governor is standing in front of a school because a 6-year-old Black girl wants to go into the school? Like, what? It's the same thing with charter schools. When they were charter schools, even going back to again that same time of integration, where they're like, yeah, you got to integrate your public schools, and they said, then we won't have public schools. Like,
literally.
and the way the country just said, ah, shucks, it's the same thing white women do. They're like, damn, I can't believe that happened, and there's simply nothing I can do about it. If you don't pick up a fucking pitchfork,
It's like when Jane Fonda went on The View and they're like, "What can we do now?" And she's like,
murder. Not
I mean, and she
every
was real
celebrity.
for that. She was like, she said, I could say something, but y'all not gonna like it.
Not every
keep joking.
celebrity can be Jane
Oh, by
Fonda.
the
It got
way,
her off.
Jane Fonda also was protesting for Angela Davis during her trial. She's true
And
to
people are
this.
like, oh, that Jane Fonda gonna get you.
And she's
Gonna
just like,
grab you
oh,
by the
she's just joking.
literally. They'll be like, she's just joshing, and it's like, do you want? I need y'all to look at Jane Fonda's face when y'all say that, and then say it again slower. Oh.
It's
Excuse me a moment. I've been drinking a lot of tea. I need to go for a moment.
You're good.
we need to like, and that's why it makes me so sad to bring it back to what I was saying earlier about that queer people are advocating for the same system that wants to prosecute us. Like,
yes. And for the way some queer people, not all queer people, but it's like I guess same thing, different branch. When they're like LGB without the T, it's like, where do you think that this is gonna stop at this? Like, do you think that they're if they do somehow manage to segregate and or eliminate trans people, do
right?
you think those same people are gonna be like, we love you LGB folk, y'all are welcome here forever, when they've explicitly stated in their platform that that is not the case? Same thing with like the prison industrial complex. Like, you think that you're making it permissible for this person to go to jail and it's not going to have a direct boomerang effect on your own community
Right.
at all.
It's the problem where people are constantly trying to reform and not abolish the system. And
be
it's like,
given money. They're like, we're allocating, we recognize that under police, like brutality has gone up so much more, and we have thrown money at this problem before and it's gotten worse, but here's our solution, we're going to put more money into it. People are like, yes, they just need more racial bias training. I have cultural competency training at my job. My boss has been here for 5 years. She has taken that cultural competency training every single year. That doesn't stop her from being racist. That doesn't stop our upper management from being one black person, two white women, and everybody else is a white man. That doesn't stop our upper management from being over 40, very, very racist, having a motto called like catch up to your ass or something, which is on our official documents and everything for our onboarding. It's like that
there's a
hasn't
little
changed, that all these things are still in place. Cultural competency training doesn't change
working
anything
in
if
I work in
racism is
a
happening.
I work in a like public hospital, and like one of the things we have like there's a module training module specifically for dealing with Indigenous Australians, because like there's a big thing in Australia, because like we've had public health for ages, and like the institution that was responsible for basically, because we had like a policy that was, imagine like the hard opposite of segregation. We had the hard opposite of that, where Aboriginal Australians were not allowed. You're not allowed to interact with other Aboriginal Australians. You must only be surrounded by white people at all times,
Forced
and learn
assimilation.
and yeah, and learn how to be like white people, and
Damn, like residential
like
schools.
it's illegal.
They did the
Like
same thing. They did the same thing with indigenous people in the US, where they would take they would make
That's why we have
indigenous
the
they would
Indian
make
Child
indigenous
Welfare Act. Literally, that's why we have
but
HIPAA.
like
yeah.
they in the hospital we have like this respecting the difference thing, where you like go through and learn like all of the New South Wales government's like policies for engaging with Aboriginal people, and it's like New South Wales Health, like this is the name of the same organization. Like in the 1980s, it's the same institution and everything. And there's a massive difference in health outcomes for Indigenous Australians, because they do not want to go to hospital. They like going to hospital is how you disappear or die, and there's no like follow up or anything. So these are things you need to know, even if you're like just cleaning the bins and stuff. And like this is how, like, yeah, and we have like these modules and stuff, and like I read the material's all good, and it's as good as you could possibly hope for. It's got all the information and everything like that, but like I'm training with like a group of like 7 other people at the same time, and it's like, if you are just not interested, like having the module put in front of you for an hour and 30 minutes isn't going to make you interested.
Yeah,
And you're still going to get the job at the end. So
exactly. And
it's
like even
just
on top of that, like y'all getting
funding,
the training doesn't change the fact that people still don't want to go to the hospital. Like that doesn't
slapping a
change.
budget in for some extra training isn't.
Exactly. And then like even relating that to like the US, because we're seeing that a lot. And I don't know if y'all seen that on Twitter, that video of that black preacher that's like, we're praying, like we're praying the autism and the ADHD out of this child. It's like that's also a result of the medical racism that's happening. It's that they've pivoted. A lot of the black community, especially a lot of the Christian black community, has pivoted from being like, oh, well, we don't need to be in hospitals, blah, 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 because like they treat us poorly. And instead of moving to a more constructive point, they're like, instead, we will pray it away. Like, we'll
Right.
pray gayness away. We'll pray disability away. If you're still disabled or you're still gay, you're not praying hard enough. You're not working for the Lord hard enough. And it's like, you can't, like, let's, like, there's holistic medicine, there's like clinical medicine, and then there's just you in your house praying that your kid doesn't have to use crutches anymore. Like that's not constructive. That's not how any of this works. And it just creates a whole economy of shame. Because if your kid is still XYZ, that means you're not doing anything hard enough. You're not being religious enough.
Right.
Meanwhile, your kid is hurting regardless. Like,
Mm.
and it comes from so much medical malpractice. Like the same thing in Atlanta, how I think they shut down, what was it, Wellfleet? And so, Atlanta being a huge metro area, huge. They only have one level 1 trauma center in the metro area now, because that other trauma center was attached to a for-profit hospital, and they were like, we're simply not making enough money, and so they shut down. And
It's
now
all
because
North Carolina.
and then on top of that, all those nurses, if you remember all those nurses on TikTok that were like making fun of their patients and talking bad about their patients, so many of those were from the hospitals at Emory and the hospitals at other hospitals, like, and yeah, other hospitals in Atlanta. And so it was like, not
90%
only
of my
do you have
job
a
is like,
reduction in trauma centers, you only have one level 1 trauma center now, on top of there being quite a few shootings a day in Atlanta on top of that. And on top of all of that, you have physical evidence that these nurses and doctors are not treating these patients right. You have a system where people don't want to go to the hospital. And when they have to go to the hospital, they're treated poorly. And so these people would rather just suffer at home and figure it out than come in. And it goes back to what you were talking about, Ian. You could have all the cultural competency in the world, and that doesn't change the fact that, one, if somebody doesn't want to use it, they're not going to use it. And two, that's not going to change the fact that people don't want to come see you anyway.
mm,
So it's like a
it's like,
whole twofold issue.
it's just this like they will need to like dismantle the idea in their brain that because someone has an authoritative job that they aren't going to be lazy and self-serving. Like laziness and laziness and self-servants are like human urges that like need to be resisted in a lot of cases.
You
And
want to know
like,
what's wild? I see that in my job. I see that in my job a lot. I help people enroll in copay assistance. If they don't enroll in the copay assistance, basically the insurance is transitioning them to a higher copay. If they enroll in the copay assistance, they're going to be fine. If they don't enroll in the copay assistance, that's 30% now being their copay. Some of these people's medications, 30% is like $7,000. Highest I've seen is $19,000. And it'll get taken care of by the copay assistance if they enroll. But what happens is the way they have us approach people, apparently, like our insurance company that we work with, they don't really tell people that this is going to happen. And so it sounds like a cold call. And our script that we have to use, our general script that we have to follow, sounds like a scam call. But what I will have my coworkers in the chat, what I see them do, they'll be like, oh, this person told me to F off. It's going to be real funny when he calls us later because he can't pay his bill because it's $7,000. It is not going to be funny. Now, will he be mad? Yes. Should he have called us back? Yes. And also, if I had to use the script, if I had called myself with the script I have to use at this job, I would have been blocked my number. I would have been blocked this a long time ago. And so it's like, it makes sense that people don't want to talk to us until they have to. And also, y'all are all in the chat talking about, oh, they'll be sorry now, or like, haha, I can't wait to hear from him when he's desperate. We're helping people, even if they don't want to be helped. And if they come back
there's a
to us
lot of that in
that doesn't
health.
change the fact that these are people that you should not be talking about.
There's a ton of that in like public health. It's just like,
But that's kind of also the problem with our justice system is that people revel in
And
this
people get
sort
their
of like
just desserts.
they think like they revel in this sort of like karma system that they think is going to be enacted
yeah,
on people.
it's the core appeal of shows like Judge Judy and stuff like that.
Yes,
It's
and
just
they'll
like,
be like, because they're like, oh, karma is
oh,
actually
you've
an
gotten
objective thing,
caught.
and it happens to everybody the same. And it's like, if you really want to believe, like, oh, bad things happen to bad people, if you really believe that, and then you look at who takes up the most room in prisons, you are going to get a very, very skewed perspective throughout your life. It's almost like, that's what's happening right now. Wow. Like if you as a justice system say that bad people get bad outcomes and we will make sure that that happens, then you make someone into a criminal because you criminalize their behavior. And then you say, well, that's a bad person. That's why that happened. While objectively not criminalizing the same behavior in other groups, of course, you're creating the air of superiority that is going to plague this country and that already has, that plagues countries around the world, continents. It's ridiculous. It is ridiculous to watch this unfold. And then, like we were talking about earlier, you raise awareness and people are like, surely that's not happening. I don't know how else to tell you that that's how, or like, I don't want to believe it. I can't believe it. It doesn't matter if you believe it or not. It is already going on.
Yeah. This to tie it back into the books, like one of the more like the like cringe characters, the like struggle hets. Was it like that woman and her husband? and her husband was like, it
Emily
just
and
sort of
Will, yeah.
reminded me of that like little tangent in the Barbie movie. Sorry, spoiler for Barbie movies in a few seconds. And
You can spoil
it
it,
was
child. I
it
don't
was
have money for a movie ticket.
just like how like the husband was giving like that energy of like, oh, you haven't seen The Godfather before? It's just like him like explaining the gains to her, but like just her whole character of just being like,
Yeah, like
she
you're
always
being
maintains
intrigued for
this
her husband's sake, and then she gets into the way she gets into crying, and then she's like, "Actually, let's have sex."
yeah, that
What do
was
you mean? What do you mean
freaking,
by that? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
yeah, it was
It
just
was like there really was no. It felt like at some points there was just no real character that you could root for. Like how I personally was rooting for Simon J when he first
yeah,
got to the chain gang, when he first got to the Sing, what is it, the Sing, whatever it had called, whatever they changed it to, and he came in. I was like, okay, you killed a bunch of people to start, but then when he like killed, when he ripped the Nazis to shreds, I was like, well, rock on, bro. Like at least one good thing happened. And then it's like, you continue to see how he acted, like how he acted, and then how Stinger started treating him. It was like, okay, less rock on, a little bit less rock on, because it was like there really was an upside and a downside to everything. The way they tied in characters, even that they brought in the end, like the person who had created the technology for the influencer, how bad she felt, and how she had actually been the person that was in Thorwald's cell.
yeah, she
Thorwald's
got thrown into
cell
prison.
was
Like,
influenced, and she was
fucking
like,
hell.
"Wow, I'm just so sorry." And it was like, "Oh,
Also,
well, you're sorry because you created that technology. It has, and you tried to destroy it, but they recovered it, and here we are." The way it all tied in. It was like, I really do appreciate that we have the goods and the bads, and I think that's why it felt like such an unsatisfying ending, because it was like I didn't even necessarily want
Yeah,
to wrap up so much as it was like, okay, that's it. She was like, "Oh, gotcha," and then she literally died. Okay,
yeah.
it was,
like
It was,
we
it
don't
was,
we don't get a little bad, we don't get any type of moral type of nothing. We don't get any type of closure like
yeah,
that.
like that's, I
All
feel
you
like
did
the
was
story
kill the
didn't,
person you love for the second time in your life. Like,
the ending felt so abrupt too, because they ended it like right at the point where the fight ends, and there's no
I want to see
resolution
what the
to
audience
that.
thinks. Yes. Like I want to see if they're perpetuating the same thing, because they fell silent when Mari first got on the field. They fell silent when she got influenced. They fell silent when they announced the season 33 twist. They fell silent when Thurwar and Stax kissed. But at the same time, in between those things, they cheered. And it was like at the end, if you could at least just be like, okay, like directly after the crowd gasped and they were like, damn, this system is really fucked up. And then you could at least imagine after that that something changed. Or it could be like the crowd roared to life because they couldn't believe it. Oh my God, what a finale, or what a season opener. And then it's like, okay, well, in the future, obviously everything stayed the same, nothing changed. Just like we didn't get anything at all. At all.
it was, I think,
So honestly, I felt like were
yeah,
unresolved. Like they didn't really resolve that thing where Star Wars need. They didn't really resolve like they started the ball rolling with so many characters like Rico or stuff like
Yes.
people
Like
like that.
what's gonna happen with what is it, Gunner or whatever? He doesn't like he's racist. He's
Gunny
supremacist.
Puddles,
And
yeah,
now he's the lead of that chain because Stax is
yeah,
dead and Thurwar's high free. Like what happens there?
Right.
Especially because he hates Rico. Like what are the new chains gonna do? Are they gonna try and still implement that no violence rule? Especially now that like links cannot both be
like
colossals. What's gonna happen
bless
there?
Badwater's
And
heart,
Randy
but
Mack's
like I
dead
don't think
too.
he's gonna do
Like
any
all the people
bad.
that kept the
Well,
order.
hopefully, I hate to say it, but hopefully somebody else on on what's his name, the racist one.
Oh, the Gunner, whatever his name was,
Yeah,
Gunner.
I hope
Gunny
somebody
Puddles,
hopefully somebody takes care of Gunner before it
See,
becomes a
that's the thing,
yeah,
is I thought at some point he was gonna fight one of the Nazis. Literally. And so
Right.
I like that's why I was like, I don't really mind that they died. I was hoping that they died anyway. So I was like, I don't mind how they died, and I don't mind that they died. But especially like the way Simon J, I really think they did a great job of specifically with his character, just showing what torture can do to you. And
Mm,
I think honestly, I found it very unrealistic when when they were talking about how their prison specifically was getting investigated because they should have never let someone like him in the game. I don't want to say someone like him. They should have never
Well,
let it get that far, let him get that far in the process. Because it was like, I think honestly, if that had happened in real life, what would happen is one of those internal investigations where it's like, oh, we
right.
investigated ourselves and nothing was wrong. Like that, I feel like
fucking
that was
hell.
one of the more unrealistic parts of the book. And it was like, I feel like that could have been a point where when they said that, I was expecting it to be more because, oh, the audience found it very distasteful that he's just killing everybody all the time. This is not good for our ratings. So you guys are disqualified, and we're going to make it under the guise of, oh, you're under review because XYZ. Like, that's what I was expecting from that. We didn't.
Mm,
Yeah, it kind of felt like the first book of the Hunger Games, but there was like no other
yeah,
books
I,
like
I was
actually break down the
expecting
system.
I was expecting like literally I was like expecting something like real to happen, like even if it was just like a Hunger Games moment where they just refused to kill each other. I was just
Something tangible like an
no
act of
one's
retribution.
attempted that yet in the like 33 seasons. Like
Mhm.
there's never been a point where people just don't kill each other because all these links seem to know
Yes.
each other. I'm
And
shocked
that's
that
the
no one's
thing.
gone, actually I'm not gonna kill you.
That's the thing. I feel
Let's
like
just
so
die to
many
the state
things,
instead.
like everybody who was about to be high freed that chose to kill themselves instead,
Cause
they could have made that a point. Because I think what
Yeah,
was
like if you just want
what
to
I
die anyway,
yeah,
yeah,
why?
it's like you could
they
at
were
least
Why?
be
all
like,
none
you
of
know
them
what,
seem
I'm
to have
actually sick and tired of
self-preservation.
this. Where because it was like even from what was her name? The first person that Stacks ended up killing, the third one, whichever one it was. Um, when they had ended up killing that really, really trained person, that was like, this is how you need to kill me. Do you understand? One thing that I noticed is that through like as the novel progressed, one thing they showed is that the closer you got to High Freed, the more you realized you had to put on a show. So the more of a show it was. And so I think like
Mm.
seeing that first part of the book, I was like, wow, like it's really just putting on a show. I wonder how that happens. And then you get to see Thurwar and Stacks as they get further and further, they put on the show. Sunset puts on the show and then has Stacks literally kill him in the black, and it's like y'all didn't think to want to be like, you know what, this system is too much. Enough is enough. I'm like on stage
No,
here.
they never really delved into like why Sunset wanted to die so bad. Like
Mm. His
I think
character was
it,
sort
I
of
think it,
underdeveloped in that way.
I mean, yeah, it sounded like he just didn't want to. He
I
didn't
wasn't
want to face the
expecting
world because he was like, I've been. I think he felt like he had been not
I
necessarily
wasn't
rehabilitated,
expecting
but
them
he
to
was a
like
different person. But outside of the chain, like outside of the chain gang, it sounded like he felt like at the end of the day he could come out of all of this. He is a new person. He feels on the inside, but on the outside he would still be the same person he was when he got in there. Like those same crimes would never leave him. And especially, that would especially be the case because he's got all the like especially that M tattoo, whatever the tattoos they had on their backs were, like he would always have a physical reminder of what got him in there and the price that he paid to get out, quote unquote. So
mm,
like it felt like
that's
everybody towards the end, the higher you got up, the more you became haunted by what you did. Whereas like the people who were the Nazis and like Gunnar, both of them felt like they had no remorse. They would definitely go to High Freed and just live the rest of their lives.
yeah.
yeah, it was just
It's just that
I
I would have. It's kind of like it feels like I was filling in the gaps, and it didn't feel like it was like the, and it felt like in a way where it felt like in an underwhelming way, like I was filling in the gaps to make the story satisfying to myself when it actually just left me unsatisfied in that part of it. Like it's fine to say that like there's like, you know, stuff between the lines, but I just felt like there wasn't really anything else going on either. Like
Yeah,
it
and I feel
wasn't
like some things actively stop the between the lines stuff. Like, oh, this would make sense. Like I'm reading between the lines here, and then the author would kind of be like, actually, no, that's not the case. It should have been the case.
yeah. Like
Mm,
I think that there were parts where I was reading it and I was like, I just I felt like there was just a little, it was like a little too surface level at some parts. Like, and I was like, it just like for it to be like as long as it was and for it to, you know,
Mm.
because it would have been
For
different if it
for the
was like
books
a
in the
novella.
capacity it operated in, it should have pursued that.
it did a lot of
Right.
sprawling, I think. Like it covered a lot of different characters' stories. I think that's what gave it a lot of its length. Because
Yeah.
it took the effort to tell you what happened to Simon J. Kraft and Singer instead of just like throwing them at you.
And then everything is kind of wrapped up. You know what? It was giving kind of like a sci-fi novel. I know I told you about like how I used to love Michael Crichton's books, and you could literally skip the whole first. Like it's not the case necessarily with this book because the background is kind of peppered in everywhere, but it was
Right.
like the first half of most sci-fi novels are just setting up for whatever's happening, like whatever actually happens in
And
the
that's
book.
one credit
Like
to the
they want
novel.
you to
It
know
does.
how this specific system works so that you can know exactly how it failed later in the book. And it's like, yes, I love that you set up all that world building, but then the story itself happens so quick. And it was like I liked that the background was peppered in everywhere, and also nothing, not even necessarily resolved. I didn't need anything to be resolved, but nothing. Well, it didn't feel like everything came back around in its relevancy. Like you introduced this information, and then it ended up
Yeah.
going here for me.
And
Like you're
it
talking
like
about Bar's knee. Like Stax pointed it out. She was like, "Oh my God, Stax knows I didn't know you know." And then she told her, and Stax was like, "I already knew." And the only time the knee actually affected her was in the doubles match. It didn't even affect her in the match with Stax when they were the ones talking about how they knew each other's
Mm.
weaknesses and stuff.
right.
It was like,
And I
what was the point when you have it for the minor plot, and then you
And
have like
also
a
just
major thing at the end, and that doesn't even take
it did feel very strange towards the end, especially like when he's like starts going into a lot of detail. It like starts turning into like an
a play by play
action thriller, and like
and a
you're
2 pager
seeing
at
them
that,
like fighting each other,
like
and it's just
3 pager of a quick little battle too.
but it's sort of like felt like it was indulging in the spectacle of the violence, which sort of undermines the story in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
Like I said,
that's
I
what I'm
didn't
talking about.
think
It's the
that
version here.
I was not expecting the story to end with a fight in the hard action sports
right.
arena. I thought that wasn't what the story was about. And then also for it to like end in such a vanilla way with a clear winner and loser and stuff. Like she did do like the anime whiffing the fight in a tragic way sort of thing. That like I thought the ending was going to be a little bit more like
Impactful looking.
political,
Which I think
as
was one of the
opposed to
reasons
like
why I felt
action.
Like y'all really did take a step back and fight each other, huh?
Mm,
After all this backstory we have, and y'all really fought each other. Mm.
yeah,
And then one of you actually killed the other one. Oh,
and it's like yeah, the fact that the story didn't like if they wanted to do that, they needed to have an example. They needed to spend some of that like some of those pages explaining an example of people who tried to willfully not kill each other, like willfully break contract with the hard action sports and not try and kill each other and go, okay, so they take you
yeah,
away to an influencer room and give you a horrific
exactly. And
they give
it's like
you some
yes,
torture time,
because they
and that's
yes.
why you have to kill each other.
Exactly. And
And
that they
that's
honestly that could have been a great place to give Thurwar. Because you remember when she got that kid who
mm,
had like a pot or
oh,
whatever,
the
and she just
child
killed
that
him
she
on
had to
sight. It was like that would have been a great place, exact like for your point exactly.
yeah,
Because they
yeah,
always say they're gonna terminate
just
them.
like
But I feel like
okay,
especially knowing who Thurwar was, they probably would have kept her in and just influenced her. And then with the addition later in the book that she had been influenced previously, that would have been a very
yeah.
interesting and a very motivating factor for why she did indeed fight Stax. Like that would have made
Mm.
a lot of
It's
sense.
like Yeah, okay, because you and this kid refused to kill each other. We influenced the crap out of you and the kid that you didn't kill. So it's like,
Exactly. And
okay,
it's like
now it
Alex
makes
was
sense
talking
why.
about that could have been a read between the lines that they effectively blocked off.
Yeah, now it makes sense why you don't Katniss and Peter them. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think that would have been an important bit of world building that I think was maybe missed. Because that was like always a question on my mind of like, these people aren't like, what's the state gonna do? Execute them? They don't seem to be
It would be
they all seem to
interesting
be
if like
tremendously comfortable with dying. So why
it would
And
don't
have
I
they
been
don't
just
think
interesting.
the state had actually
give
ever
him the
executed
finger?
somebody. Like you're saying, we should get an example of somebody that actually happened to, because it's like, will they actually execute them? Will they influence them? Will something else? Will they be disappeared? Like,
Because
what will
they all
actually?
seem to be extremely willing to kill each other, even though like all the links get to meet each other before they fight, and in some ways love each other literally, and for some reason they all still end up killing each other. They needed to establish what happens when you
Yeah,
refuse to kill.
yes, it was in it. Like, this is an extraordinary book, and it ended kind of ordinary. I'll say that. Like, there were extraordinary aspects of
It
it.
didn't
I
stick
feel
the
like those
landing.
weren't necessarily
Yeah.
carried forward, and or they ended right when they would have been beneficial for the story.
Yeah, and I also feel like they could have did something where like, you know, like why opt to die in the spectacle when you could have like if you were just okay with death, you could have died anyway. Like at
Y'all
any
could have
point.
died in each other's arms.
Especially because it's very clear that they don't do anything to try to keep you alive outside of the arena. Like they don't care if it was pretty well established that they don't care if you live outside of it because they let Sunset die, right? And
Mhm.
they let a lot of people die.
They like Simon J. Kraft just like
Yeah.
obliterate like several potential fights. Like, does
Mhm.
that create scheduling conflicts? Do they just go, oh, maybe
Yeah,
we
like,
should just put
and
some
he killed his
infomercials
whole
on
link.
during that
He
time
killed all his
slot?
chains. Yeah, like all these fights had to be canceled because he killed almost everybody on his chain,
Yeah, that would
and
have
then
had
the
some
chain didn't
massive
get bigger.
scheduling impacts. And like
Exactly.
that would have fucked
Like,
up
and
tons
then
of
the
ad
Sunset
space.
died in the darkness of the blackout. You'd think that they'd still want that spectacle, and so they'd have them
Yeah.
surveilled 24/7. Like,
Yeah,
it
it's like
was.
yeah, it's like even if
They
you
do
have
have
We've
them
been
absolutely
primed
build.
by
no
the Hunger
concern
Games.
for their
We've been primed by
safety.
the Hunger Games.
They do kind of have them filmed like 24/7, don't they? Like they
So they have 24/7, but like Sunset, he killed himself in the blackout, and they still have those same blackouts. Like, nothing,
right the
nothing
blackouts.
around that specific, like the pauses in surveillance, when very clearly those pauses are where big things seem to happen. They still have those pauses.
Right.
And
Which
between
doesn't
like the
really make
pictures
sense. Like you would think that they would like
this
if they have right, if they have the means to have them film 24/7, like there's no reason why they like wouldn't like do like a Big Brother style thing where they have like live feeds and stuff. Like they're
exactly. And
especially
it's
if
like
they
they
know
have
that they're
live
missing.
feeds, but like those little 10-minute downtimes, as much as I love them having 10-minute downtimes, people keep dying in the 10-minute downtimes. And it's like, y'all
You
want to
think they would
have
like
people be
enforce
outraged that Sunset is dead, and they're gonna blame you for not having the cameras there.
I think that's like, there was like so many opportunities for them to do something like for like the links to do something, but they all just seemed very compliant in a way that was
it
like
almost
frustrating to
like
watch.
with the character Rico, it almost seemed like I don't know, like there was like this, like they tried to like do like this found family type thing with like Rico and like Thurward and them, but it just
They're
kind of
like,
falls on
I'll
its face,
carry you through in a murder game.
and it kind of falls on its face when you get to the ending. So like now Thurward is out, and like also she knew that she was gonna get made to fight Stacks like early on
In
because
the
the
way that
professor told
Stacks
her,
also knew. Like,
and then they didn't ingenue anything. They were just like, okay, like this is our fate, I guess. Like, and
the way they were like, we're just not gonna tell each other we know this deep dark thing.
like it almost doesn't. It almost it isn't. satisfying because because if you know you're gonna die anyway, if you know one of you is gonna die, right? Why not like think of some way to like you have nothing to lose. Like they literally have nothing to lose.
Literally.
And
That when they were on that canyon cliff, I was like, oh, I get it. No. The perfect opportunity. Y'all could have at least done like a okay, we're gonna jump together, and then the like force field pulls them back anyway, and then they implement new rules, right? And it's like the way they even had them on the cliff in the first place
Yeah,
was like,
like
yeah,
this.
you had precisely placed things and you did not use them.
Yeah, it's just like the state, like the state as in like the governing body, puts
Mhm.
its balls in the hands of the Lynx so many times throughout the story, and the Lynx do not do anything. And like that's not necessarily wrong, but they need to explain why the Lynx don't do something rebellious with a lot of the power that they're given. Or like explain why Lynx may have attempted to do it in the past and it's not worked. Like,
right.
yeah, it's just there's like holes there and they're sort of frustrating to look at. It's like, okay, so has a Link attempted doing this to like cheat death or to like give the middle finger to the man or whatever? Like the Links just don't attempt to do anything. They're just like, oh, death games. Yeah, I can do that. And it's just
And it's like I get that it's like a different faith. They're like anything to get out
mm,
of prison, and it's like I
yeah.
definitely understand compliance, and also you're not going to get sent back
Yeah,
to the prison, right? If it doesn't work for you here, like if you defect, they're
yeah,
just gonna kill you. So it's like
yeah. And
if
they
you already
had the
wanted a fate
groundwork.
like this, and you already knew that you were gonna die in the game, like most of these people go in knowing they're gonna die in the games. You may as well rebel at some point if
They
you're
also
gonna
just
die anyway, you may as well choose your own death instead
they
of
had
getting
the
matched up. Like when
groundwork
Randy Matt
for
got
it.
matched up and he was like, "Yeah,
Because like
this is
they had the
probably my
groundwork
final
for it
battle." Bro, you
sort
ain't
of.
think to do something in there? You ain't think to do anything?
Because like that's what the influencer was. The influencer existed to be a fate worse than death, and that made a lot of the decision making process of the Links like make sense within context. Like they're going, okay, here's a thing the government can do to you that's even worse than getting killed in a blood sport, and like that's why you might want to participate. Except like
Not my
I feel
wanna.
like they
He
just
said
needed
I should
to,
just be participating.
huh?
Oh
That
man.
you might want to participate because otherwise you're gonna suffer a fate worse than death. Okay, does that sound good to you?
And they
Okay,
said anything worse than death, absolutely, or anything but death. Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, but the
but
repercussions seem very nonchalant. Like they
Mm-hmm.
only really like it seemed like they were I don't know, they were only really interested in making sure that you performed within the confines of the gladiator games. Like if anything you did outside of that was kind of like free game and they even let like Thor War bend the rules in some way. Like they like the way that she was like able to like buy things for other people and stuff like that. Like they they let them do all that stuff like because I guess they saw it as like a way to like create spectacle. Like it's kind of like in the Hunger Games when they let Peeta and Katniss like both survive because that's also like a type of spectacle and it like created a way for it like created a way for the
Mm-hmm.
games
And
to
then, well, because then as punishment for that 75th games, they only reaped from the existing winners. So
yeah,
it was
they
like
did
it
like an all
eventually came
star
back to
season.
yeah, and I felt like that's what they tried to do in the season
yeah, they
33, but
got
it's
quarter
like, okay, they
quelled.
already knew about it, and then they also didn't do anything about it. So you got like it's 2 points where that could have happened.
Hmm. I would have liked them to would have liked the author to explore the industry plant guy as well. That would have been interesting. It
Oh,
was
that
just sort
first
of
dude.
sort of an anecdote, and it's like, okay, so how did they rig the matches for this guy and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
For Nova, yeah, or whatever his name was.
I guess I just my main gripe with it in general is that I came out of it with a lot of questions and I felt like it left a lot of loose threads that I would have liked to have been nipped down. And I wouldn't it wouldn't necessarily be if I knew that there was going to be a sequel, I wouldn't necessarily have these same criticisms because
Because we
I
can
would have,
anticipate. Yeah.
yeah, we can anticipate, oh, I can't wait for them to resolve this. I can't wait for them to come back to this or come back to that or come back. And
Mhm.
this felt like the first book in a series so much. And so
Yeah.
I hope there is a sequel, and then maybe I'll come back and say,
Because
oh,
when
the-
was this book released? Is this a fairly
this year
recent
it came
book?
out this year. Yeah,
Oh,
it
It
came.
came out this year. That's why
because
there's
I was
23
like,
holes in the child.
I have no like I have like no frame of reference when reading a book. I just like automatically go, oh, this is like modern, or this has existed for all time, like the same way
Yeah,
you do with movies.
2023.
I
First
just like
edition too.
all books always existed for all time. They
Yeah, and
just don't have a
it's getting
time.
read a lot because it got put on like in America. There's this thing with like book clubs where like a lot of books will get like book club stickers, like Oprah's book club or Reese's book club. This is a
Mhm.
Reads with Jenna book, so it's really popular. So it'll probably get it'll probably do, at least it'll do like really good things for the author where they'll be able to like get a lot of, I think it's also maybe like a Good Morning America pick or something, and like also
Yeah.
it was offered through this like book service called what's it called, Book of the Month. So like a lot of people have been able to get their hands on this book, sold a lot of copies, so they should be able to, and it's available at a lot of libraries. Like a lot of libraries requested it. A lot of libraries have a lot of copies of it, so it should be an instance where like they'll be able to, like, if they wanted to make a sequel, it would be really easy for them to make a sequel to it. If they wanted to make, like, I don't know, companion novels or something, they would be able to do that. But so I hope that they do. Actually, maybe I'm sticking on my head. Maybe there is a sequel plan. Let me look up. Let's see.
Also, I
uh
just looked at the first little page, and it was like any relevance to like actual real events is entirely coincidental. And I love having that as well as having the footnotes about real life actual things going on. I
It's
did
like
definitely, I didn't, and I'm glad that you mentioned it was written in 2003 because I was thinking about like the reference to Centoya Brown in the middle of it. I was like, oh, this is very, very recent. I didn't realize it had been written this year.
oh,
yeah,
that's
and just like
interesting.
yeah, there was a lot of stories that were unresolved. Like, what's his name? I have like there's Australian reality television show hosts that I would have mentioned here, but they'll just they just will be lost on you guys. But just like the weird like announcer guy just like randomly going, I'm sad now. And it's like, oh, well, I'm really sorry to hear that, but you were kind of annoying the whole book. Um, but yeah, this is that guy's story sort of like ended just like, "Eep," and it's like, hmm, yeah, it definitely feels a bit like cliffhanger,
Yeah.
because it's like it sort of feels like, yeah, it feels a lot like a first. It's rough comparing it to the Hunger Games because it is like I feel like it's doing a lot more than the Hunger Games does. Like
Yeah,
it's definitely
it
it's
did a
made a
lot
lot.
more, but it had such a different ending, I guess. Such
Yeah,
an abrupt type of yeah, I mean like you guys are right. I think it played along. There wasn't really anything at the end to give it an oomph. It was just like, yep, they did what the games told them to do, and one of them won.
yeah, it's like
Yeah.
there was nothing like they didn't attempt to like subvert fate in any way. Like I was going, how are they gonna do this? And like I had all these like different ways of and so I guess in that way it was a bit subversive in that it just didn't do anything. Like so I'm like, okay, so maybe they're both gonna commit suicide and then the producers are
And then
gonna
they
be
were
like,
like,
nah
no,
crap.
we will follow the rules. What you mean follow the rules?
And the
That's
fact that
your lover.
there's been 33 seasons and like only one person got high freed, it's just like
Literally.
it's like this isn't much of a game show. Like the idea is like you to have someone who wins at the end usually in like a game show. And like that's how you make the thing seem fair
Mhm.
and like didn't like yeah, there was like narratives about like maybe if you had more high freed people historically, it's like, okay, so like let's look at the like absolute rehabilitative magic of hard action sports. Let's see how these people are coping with their life outside. That's a, like it's like yeah, it did feel like there's a lot of world building elements that needed to go further. It feels unfinished, I think.
Yeah.
The story feels unfinished, which I guess now that I know that it was released in 2023 makes a great deal more sense. It does feel like sequel intent was built into
Yeah.
its
I
tissue.
hope so. I wonder if I'm hoping it's not one of those, because I know Book Talk's been talking about this trilogy that ended up being a duology, because of the way it was, like, it wasn't pushed out and it wasn't marketed. And so the author ended up having to wrap it up really quick in the second book. But the people who didn't know that gave it bad reviews because they were like, it feels rushed. And they were like, well, it was rushed. You're right. But since you didn't know that, you wrote the scathing review. Now this person's probably not going to get a third book. So I'm hoping maybe they're setting it up for a sequel. I'm gonna leave it open, but I don't know. If they don't, they don't. But I would really hope for a sequel. Now, what the sequel will look like, I don't know if it could be as long as this one, because I don't know if there's much else to tell without getting into like actual rebellion territory. And I'm not sure that it'll get into that, since it didn't really do much here past a protest here. You know what? And I'll say this last thing before because I got to make it Dorito casserole. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I believe in myself. But I'll say the last thing. The protests honestly feel like they're mirroring what we talked about earlier, with like whiteness and just wanting to stay in proximity to power, not necessarily equality. It definitely felt like the protests were like, okay, we just want to give a performance. We just want to show what we can do, and then didn't actually do anything past that. Like, I feel like maybe Mari a little bit may have been like the only one that actually was gonna do a little something, something.
Yeah,
But yeah,
there
it
was
felt like they like when they huddled and then they left. I
yeah,
was
they
like,
did the
okay,
huddle.
but
It's
now
like there's that like reaction clip from a while back. I can't remember. Where it's just the lady saying, "You did this for what?" Like
exactly.
it
Like,
just
because
didn't.
now like everybody's in trouble. Now you got people getting influenced, you got people getting shot.
Yeah,
And the Lynx still had to
like
go to the stadium.
like
Like,
this is like that's the thing about like protests meaningful protests like come with
or
decent
they'd be like,
human
oh, protests
cost.
are disrupting traffic. I don't like them. Well, it's a
Yeah,
protest.
they
It's
come like a meaningful protest will like you can very reasonably expect it to come with very substantive human costs to like individuals. And like so it's really really important when you do a protest that you have like a specific goal that like that can be met, or like
and that people
even
will
if
be
it's
working for
theoretically.
at the cost. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like otherwise it's unfair to the people who end up getting incarcerated. It's like, and like, will people even show up if you don't have clear goals written? It's like, let's huddle the links. They didn't like a
We're back to
successful.
Angela Davis. Will people
I
even
was
show up if you don't have
like
as common of a goal?
when that happened, when that those protests were happening, and like I wasn't past the chapter yet, I was like, okay, so this is how they're going to subvert the season 23 death knell that they've this like plot point that they've introduced. This is how they're going to subvert it. The links, it's just going to get completely derailed. The links get kidnapped, and like, but then they're like, nah, the process
Like,
just
no, no, no,
ends
no.
and
We're just gonna
everything
do something.
resumes. And it's just like, oh, okay. And
Exactly.
then the story just goes on.
But child, let me go ahead and let me go make this casserole. I think it's gonna take a minute. And I
Uh,
was supposed to be in bed by 10. I think I'm gonna
oh
be in there by
yeah, it's
midnight at best.
Okay.
nighttime for you
Well, yeah, I
guys.
just
We've
looked it
been
up.
going for a while. We meandered a bit. You should
Yeah,
consider
what was
putting
that?
in
That was like 2.5 hours. Look at us go.
put some
Yeah.
like
So I
chapters
did look
into
it
the
up, and
YouTube video.
I don't think there will be a I don't think there will be a sequel, but at least there's nothing about it yet. So hopefully he does announce some sort of sequel. And I want to
Somebody start
say
quoting
go
Adjei
ahead
on
and
Twitter. We'll get
get
it popping.
recording here. I'll say thank you guys for coming, and it was a pleasure discussing these two books. I think this was one of the best meetings we've had yet. I really enjoy both these books. And I think they'll both
Yeah,
be included in a project I'm doing for my YouTube channel. So look out for
we
that.
we meandered a bit, but they were all good topics.
Yeah,
Yep.
I mean, I think we talked about a lot that was in the book, both books, and I think we talked about a good a good bunch of real life application because it sure as hell happened in real life. So
Yeah, and these books were both really good and really important, even though we did have some problems with the ending of Tanking All Stars. But so that was the meeting, and thank you guys for coming.
of course.